Ed Postma grows up in Tampa, Florida in the 1980s with his father, Ren, and his stepmom, Carla, who steps in after Ed's biological mother leaves him.
She had moved and dropped out of his life, and after a period of years, he really didn't care to see her. He said, "I've got my mom."
Carla's two sons, Sean and Charles, round out this happy blended family.
He always introduced me to all of his friends as, "Hey, this is my little brother." You know, we just threw the whole step thing away. You know, we got really close.
We'd always go out doing stuff, you know, fishing, hunting, whatever we could find to do.
He was a typical teenager. He got into minor scrapes and whatever, as children do. He was really kind of a good kid. Became a pretty close-knit family.
Ed loves his family.
Hey, Georgia.
And the ladies.
Hey, Rosalie.
Ed was supremely confident and cocky.
You know, he'd have a girlfriend come to the house, and then probably a month later, you know, you wouldn't see her again.
He would date off and on, but he really didn't get too terribly serious about anybody.
But there's one thing Ed does get very serious about.
He always had his head underneath the hood of a car and was always tinkering with it.
My dad would bring home an old junk truck, and they'd take it completely apart and put it back together like brand new.
After high school, at the age of 22, Ed enrolls in a trade school to become a professional mechanic.
I want you to meet somebody.
Which leads him to meet a girl unlike any he's met before.
Hi, I'm Jackie.
What attracted him to Jackie initially, and this was his words, was those baby doe brown eyes. She was his instructor's stepdaughter, and he'd met her through him.
Well, she was kind of fun-loving, and she would do about anything for fun, just like Ed would.
There's an instant spark, and Ed is immediately hooked.
She had red curly hair, and she was slender, and she was just like the type that Ed would like.
He was very handsome, and I don't know, I guess he had a little bit of a bad boy thing going on, and she's always been drawn to kind of a bad boy look.
Hey! Get away from me! No!
I guess they hit it off right away. Really right away, as in the first night.
But it turns out Jackie is part of a package deal.
Hey, Mom. Come in here. I want you to meet somebody.
I came home from work, and there was a baby there. And I went, "Okay, whose kid?" "Oh, that's Jackie's." He was 9 months old at the time. And I went, "Oh." Ed said, "Yeah, I really didn't know at first either, but isn't he cute?"
She quit school at 16. She was married at 17. She wanted to be somebody's mom, and she wanted somebody to take care of her. That was the way she was.
Hey, thanks so much for letting us stay here. This is really great of you
They
guys.
move fast. Just weeks after they meet, Jackie and her baby son move in with the Postmas.
It was never, you know, "Oh, this is my girlfriend," and bringing her over. It was more like, "This is my girlfriend, here she is, and she's never going away." Just one day she was there.
Well, it was like she spent the night and never left. And adding a baby to the house, that was different. And I said, well, apparently they have no place to go. And we couldn't turn people away that had no place to go.
Not surprisingly, Jackie and her baby are a burden to Ed's parents, Carla and Ren, who are strapped enough for cash as it is.
Nobody was working. We were doing all the supporting.
And she didn't have a high school diploma. So it made it difficult for her to find a decent job.
This is not working. She has to go now.
And finally it got to where my parents told her, you know, you can't be here no more, because they were arguing all the time and she was starting problems with the family.
You're gonna say anything?
Fine.
Maybe we're moving too fast.
Go to hell.
I know they had some rough times the first couple months they were together, and I know Ed was kind of trying to push her away, you know.
Jackie finally agrees to leave, but she doesn't go far.
She was living in her car across the street from our house with the baby.
This kept leeching on Ed for some reason. She wouldn't go away.
You know what? Forget it.
That reason soon becomes obvious.
I don't know what to say.
Jackie is pregnant.
She told Ed that he was the father. And this was right about the time that they had gotten together. And I think he took it as, okay, well, you're not going to leave. We might as well try to make things work.
You're gonna be a great dad.
Ed was always good with kids. Ed couldn't stand the idea of a kid growing up without a dad around.
That made up, you know, repaired their differences and started back together again.
They finally eventually got their own place, and it seemed like things kind of smoothed out from there.
As the months pass, bad boy Ed turns into a responsible boyfriend. He prepares for fatherhood.
That was going to be the end of it. You know, the end of all the partying and all the girl chasing and things like that.
I'll take care of my brother.
Psychotherapist Stacy Kaiser and forensic psychologist Brian Russell can understand why Ed is so devoted to his new family.
A lot of people wonder why Ed, at 22 years old, would be willing to take Jackie and her son in. But I don't wonder at all. It's part of his character. He's a loyal, family-oriented person, and he wants to settle down, and this is the perfect family, all built into one person.
I wondered if Ed wasn't maybe even trying to vicariously fix the maternal abandonment that he had gone through by creating a nuclear family earlier in life than a lot of guys really want to.
But this nuclear family is about to explode. After Jackie gives birth, to everyone's surprise, she and Ed put the baby up for adoption.
They just weren't in a position where they could take care of another child.
We just don't feel that we can provide the home.
Money may be one motive, but family members believe there's another reason the couple gives away the baby.
When the baby was born, they had only been together maybe 7 months at that point of time, and it was a full-term baby.
I know he probably in his heart didn't think it was his baby.
Aspiring mechanic Ed Postma falls for Jackie Rosser, a divorced single mother. Money's tight, and they decide to give their newborn baby up for adoption. Despite this rocky start, they're dedicated to making the marriage work. A year into the relationship, Ed gets a job as a truck mechanic. Things are definitely looking up.
He was an excellent mechanic and a great person, and easy to get along with, no troubles whatsoever.
Good job today, man. Appreciate that.
Ed and his new family moved to Bradenton, Florida, to be closer to Ed's new job.
Bradenton is kind of a working class community. There are fishing villages nearby, a lot of factories, a lot of trucking.
Ed's family is delighted to see Jackie's warmth and affection.
She seemed to really, really love Ed.
They just had some good times together where they were affectionate a lot.
In fact, they can't seem to keep their hands off each other.
She would come down there and they would go out there in the car and fool around and do that kind of stuff. And, you know, they weren't descriptive, but, you know, you could kind of put two and two together. Of course, he didn't do this when he was on the clock or anything like that.
Hey.
Hey, Jackie, can I talk to you for a second? I got something in the mail. It's really confusing.
But some suspect that Jackie is hiding something.
It's a letter from the hospital, and it says that the baby was full term, but I thought it was...
When the baby was born, We counted out the months, and they had only been together maybe 7 months at that point of time. But she kept saying the baby came early. And she kept Ed with that belief.
Wrong. He's probably just wrong. They do mistakes all the time.
After 5 years, Ed and Jackie marry in a civil ceremony. Jackie's family is there, but not Ed's.
He called us, and he says, "We got married yesterday." We go, "Oh, you did?"
I was kind of like, wow. Nice to you to invite me. It did surprise me a little bit, but I guess it shouldn't have. They'd been together for quite a few years by that time.
We just took it, okay. If this is what you want, you've done it.
This is a red flag for me. It makes me wonder, is Ed's family not supporting this relationship? Do they not like Jackie? What's going on here that they wouldn't come to their son's wedding?
I think it's generally best for the success of any couple, including Ed and Jackie, if from day one their union has the support of the families on both sides.
Maybe it's because of these family tensions, but Ed immerses himself in his work.
He used to work, to 5, 6 o'clock for me, and then he'd go work on these other guys' trucks to 6, 8, 10 o'clock at night.
What?
Hey, I miss you.
Listen, you gotta stop calling me here, okay?
Jackie's patience starts wearing thin.
She would argue with him that he worked too much, and that wasn't going to keep him from working, of course, because that was his job. It's what he had to do.
Have a good day.
As the months pass, rumors start to fly. It seems Jackie has found a new way to fill her days.
One of his buddies come over to his house while he was at work, and I guess Jackie opened the door in a lingerie or something. Don't know if anything happened out of it, but the buddy come back bragging to Ed about it. And of course he went back and asked her, and she's told him it wasn't true. And there was some talk about her sleeping with the landlord. But don't know how true that was either. I told him, if you're not happy, if you think things are going on, you gotta do what you feel in your heart. If you feel like you need to leave and get away, that's what you gotta do.
But Ed decides to stay.
Ed stayed with her because of the little boy. That's about the only reason he stayed. He didn't want to see what would happen to him if he wasn't there to help guide things along.
But he didn't want to break the family up, which is understandable.
It's very possible that he's truly taken with her and connected to her. It's also possible that his sense of loyalty and family is really coming through here, and that he wants to try and stay and make it work.
Obligation between two people can be a powerful bonding force, and it can cause those people to stay together for a significant period of time, but it's not a great foundation for a truly healthy long-term relationship.
In 1998, 3 years after the wedding, Ed is given another reason to stay. Jackie's pregnant. Again.
He was excited. He really was.
But lingering doubts will soon resurface.
He thought she was out fooling around.
Ed had a 2-second temper and would fight at the drop of a hat, anybody's hat.
Ed and Jackie Postma are married and expecting their first child together. The pregnancy is a much-needed boost for their strained relationship. It also eases some of the tensions with her in-laws, Ren and Carla.
We'd watch the baby grow within her, and we didn't really still put our whole trust in her, but there was more love coming from us to her. Of course, this was the first born baby grandchild of ours, so when she'd ask for something for the baby, I'd just go out and get it, because we were really excited about being grandparents.
Jackie's excited too.
She loved her children. She liked being pregnant. She loved babies.
And this time, when Jackie gives birth to a daughter, there's no doubt about who the father is.
She's cute. She's so cute.
But when the little girl was born, she looked so much like Ren's mother, it was scary.
He was a great father to him. You know, every day after work, he'd come home, spend time with them, and the kids had a good life.
By the year 2000, Ed and Jackie are ready to move their growing family into a bigger place.
I don't know. You tell me.
They find a house in a subdivision called Fresh Meadows, but it's more than Ed can afford.
He lived from week to week, really. He never borrowed from me, but I know he borrowed from some of my mechanics.
He said, we gotta have some money. We can't save enough money to put a down payment on a home.
What?
She got the money for the down payment on their home from her uncle that she had promised to pay back.
We can still get it.
The house is theirs. First-time homeowner Ed is proud beyond words.
It was a nice house. Had a nice backyard, had a 2-stall garage attached. It was practically brand new.
Soon the family settles into a comfortable routine. Ed takes care of making the money, but Jackie's domain is the house and kids.
I didn't think she was that good of a housekeeper, you know, because every time I went out to the house, the dishes were laying in the sink, and, you know, the place was a little mess.
I'm going, what's the problem here?
The new house was supposed to be a new beginning, but old tensions start to reemerge.
They had gotten into a really bad fight one weekend. And he just showed up at the house and he had both the kids. And he said, we're fighting. He said, can we stay for the weekend? And we said, yeah, sure, no problem. And he says, I'm kind of getting tired of her stuff.
Jackie's also losing patience, frequently.
You're crazy!
Just if the kids would do the littlest things wrong, she would get mad and yell at them and, you know, spank them sometimes when they shouldn't have been spanked.
And when Ed's stepbrother Sean and his family move in temporarily, the strain reaches a fever pitch.
There was a lot of tensions in that house. My girlfriend, her kids, me. The house wasn't meant for that many people.
Ed, who works 60 hours a week just to make ends meet, doesn't want to talk about it.
All right, you give her back the remote. Just moved in here.
He's sort of becoming this Superman. He's working a lot of hours, he's got a great home, he's taking care of the children. And so it's a way for him to look at himself and say, despite what's going on with my wife, I still have some things to feel good about.
But it also may be that he really did believe that if he could just earn enough, if he could just work hard enough, if he could just provide enough, that somehow that would make the marriage work out. And usually, that will not make it work out.
All the while, Jackie makes frequent trips to visit her mother, who lives 80 miles away and suffers from Parkinson's disease.
So she was up there like every weekend or every other weekend, almost all the time. Almost all the time she was up there.
At least, that's what Jackie claims. Her cell phone statements show repeated calls to a mysterious number, stoking Ed's old suspicions.
He thought she was out fooling around.
Ed is right. For months, Jackie has been seeing 35-year-old truck driver Michael Cordes, a real bad boy, with a very real rap sheet, auto theft and forgery.
He was a good-looking fellow, you know, grizzly a bit, you know, tough guy. Maybe she wanted that.
Jackie and Michael had been carrying on as a couple for quite some time. They had called each other boyfriend and girlfriend. They would hold hands. They would show mutual affection to each other.
Instead of confronting Jackie, Ed just withdraws.
When stuff was going bad, he would hide it, you know, just because of his personality, how he is.
Guys in particular are less vocal when their marriages aren't going well, when they're feeling depressed about anything. Guys tend to turn it inward more than women do, and Ed may be doing that.
Ed is angry, has a lot to be angry about. He's a single parent, basically. He's a sole provider, and he's not expressing this. He doesn't have an outlet. He's just busy distracting himself. And so it's making him emotionally flattened. It's destroying him.
Hey, great barbecue, buddy.
I knew something was wrong because Ed got very quiet and, he was by himself a lot.
Well, I just knew it had something to do with Jackie because she wasn't there, her absence. I think it really bothered him and hurt him. I could see the sadness in his eyes.
As his anger simmers, Jackie leaves with the children for a couple of days to take care of her ailing mother.
Her Parkinson's was starting to get worse and worse and worse, and she had to have surgery, so my sister came up and took care of her. Because she didn't work, the rest of us did. She had freedom to do whatever she wanted.
Now Ed is the lonely one.
Ed said, I want some quality family time. He goes, Dad, can you stay for a while yet? And he goes, well, yeah.
Ed's father and stepmother drive down for a visit and find the house in a shambles.
Where's your wife? I went, how could you treat such a beautiful home like this?
Days have turned to weeks with no sign of Jackie or the kids.
I said, so when's she coming back? He goes, well, her mom's surgery was postponed. I said, oh, okay.
He'd call up there and she wasn't there. So he knew something was going on, I think.
Things just didn't add up right.
The kid's been out of school for over a month. How can she do that?
I don't know. I mean, the kids look...
And when we were coming home that night, I just told Ren, I said, something is not right. Something is just terribly, terribly, terribly wrong.
Ed, ever faithful, decides to stay and wait. Jackie never calls. But soon Ed will get a call, and it'll change his life.
And I said, what about the kids? What about Jackie and the kids? Are they okay?
I heard that scream, and that's something you never want to hear.
Ed and Jackie Postma's marriage is riddled with mistrust and suspicion. Jackie has left on an extended visit to see her ailing mother, or so she says. Ed suspects an affair. Still waiting for his wife to return, Ed is called out on a mysterious errand near Duet, Florida.
Duet is a remote, desolate area in northeast Manatee County. There's not a lot of traffic, there's not a lot of businesses, there's not a lot of people.
There's simply a convenience store / gas station called the Oasis.
It's nearly midnight when Ed hits the road. And he drives into a nightmare. Early the next morning, a woman stops at the Oasis to change her baby's diaper. She stumbles onto something horrific.
It was particularly cold-blooded and gruesome.
Police are called to the scene.
They don't know what they have on their hands. Is it a random murder? Is it a robbery? Is it somebody that knows the person?
Police came to our house Monday morning and asked if we were the parents that had posted. And they said, your son's been murdered.
Saw my mom and I heard that scream. And that's something you never want to hear.
And I said, murdered how? I said, was it road rage?
Ed Postma had suffered 4 gunshot wounds.
In the temple, in the back of the head, the front of the head. And then there was a graze at the top of his head.
On top of that, Ed's throat was slashed twice.
If someone was looking at this murder, they would think that it was perpetrated by someone who was emotionally connected to Ed, someone who wanted him killed for emotional reasons.
It was done up close and personally, as if the killer wanted either to be seen and maybe recognized by Ed, or to look into Ed's face while they did it.
And I said, what about the kids? What about Jackie and the kids? Are they okay?
The police tell Carla that Jackie and the kids are safe at home, but Carla needs to see them just to be sure.
We didn't know what was going on. We had no idea why anybody would want to murder Ed. Sweet little guy that he was.
I couldn't imagine who would do that. I thought it had to be some kind of robbery or something, you know.
Detectives immediately start talking to everyone in Ed's family, starting with Jackie.
As a normal procedure, when a spouse is killed, you go to the other spouse. Did he have any enemies? What can you tell us about his lifestyle? What information can you possibly shed on this? She repeatedly said, I can't imagine what Ed was doing out there at that location at that hour.
Are you seeing anybody? You're having affairs? No, 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 no.
She denies having an affair and points a finger at someone very close to her husband, Sean McGlamory, Ed's stepbrother.
They used to fight a lot.
She just said that he and Ed had problems over the years, and that there was some animus between them.
She was alluding to the police that we were in fist fights and rolling on the ground and all that. From what I understand, they never even thought it was serious. Him and I had never thrown a punch in anger, ever at each other.
Detectives interview the rest of Ed's entourage, but none of them seem to know anything about why Ed was in Duet that night.
Did I send Ed anywhere the night he got killed? I said, no, I didn't talk to him the whole weekend.
At that point, they didn't have any suspects initially.
A week after he's found at the Oasis gas station, Ed's family lays him to rest.
It was a nice funeral. They had a lot of people there, a lot of people, a lot of his friends, a lot of the drivers.
I don't think there was a dry eye in the house, you know.
Jackie is especially distraught.
During the funeral, she cried and sobbed, and she held my hand the whole time. And
she was very sick. At the time, we didn't know why she was sick, but she was very sick, and she was very weepy.
A week after the funeral, Jackie announces that she's pregnant.
We felt very bad for her, knowing that she had a rough life ahead of her, being a widow with 2 children. And we were happy that she was pregnant. And we said, well, maybe it's the son that Ed always wanted of his own.
I remember the postmen were going over and mowing the lawn. They were helping her out. Everyone seemed to be, going over there, consoling her.
I'd say, have you been out of the house? No. Okay, let's go to the store. Just spend some time, get away from the house a little bit, get your mind off from things, because we were trying to comfort her as much as we could.
With another child on the way and desperate for money, Jackie asks Ed's boss about their $50,000 employee life insurance policy.
She called there just about every day, wanted to know how soon she could collect his insurance.
While the claim is being processed, the company sets up a fund to help the grieving widow.
Drivers used to come and put money in there, $20 bills, $100 bills, and truck drivers ain't rich people, or if they see somebody in trouble, they like to help out, and they're very good about it.
She went around 2 or 3 times a week and emptied out the jars.
Jackie takes to the streets and distributes ribbons in memory of Ed. Her message is clear.
She wouldn't rest until his murder was solved.
5 weeks after the murder, detectives call Jackie down to the station for another round of questioning. To her surprise, they've learned a thing or two since the murder.
Fairly early on in the investigation, it became known that Jackie was involved in an extramarital affair with Michael Cordes.
By now, Jackie's affair with Michael has been going on for about a year.
Mike was a lifelong criminal, petty theft here, passing bad checks, stealing cars from girlfriends. Not exactly your model citizen.
When confronted by the evidence that the police already knew, and that at that point it was better tactically for her to acknowledge the obvious than to continue to deny it.
I guess.
After several grueling hours, Jackie finally admits to the affair. And that's not all.
Hello? What? Oh, slow down.
I'm broken down out here in Duet. I'm at the Oasis. And being the good husband that he was, unsuspectingly, he drove out there to help her.
No, I'll be right there.
Under further questioning, she actually admits that, yes, I sent them out there, but it was just to talk to Ed, to scare him, to let him know that I'm seeing Michael and that we're going to move forward in that direction.
Calm down. What are you doing out there? Okay.
Mike was supposed to tell Ed this and then beat him up to make sure that Ed got the message.
But when Ed arrives, Jackie is nowhere in sight.
Jackie!
Testimony was that instead, he's confronted by Michael Cortez with a gun pointed at him. At that point, he realizes what's going on.
Ed charged Cords, yelled, "You dumb son of a b***," and went after him. That was Ed. I mean, if you wanted to fight, he was going to give it to you. No holds barred.
According to Jackie, Michael took their plan one step too
You don't
far.
have to do this.
And at that point, Michael Cortez shoots him 4 times in the head. He falls to the ground. She was traumatized by the death of her husband. She never planned for it, so she was distraught, and that's why she didn't fully cooperate with the police right away.
Finally, she comes clean enough to say that, well, maybe she did intend for him to be hurt but not killed, and the guys took it too far. She never really takes responsibility for the role that she played in the fact that her husband is now deceased.
I think that she believes that if she tells a story and it's convincing enough, that they will believe her story and not dig any deeper and find out if there's more guilt there.
But the plot thickens. Jackie reveals that Michael had an accomplice, 30-year-old Todd Martin, whom Michael met while in prison.
You said we were just gonna scare him, man.
He brought Todd Martin along for backup because Ed's a strong guy.
Jackie tells the cops that Cordes asked Todd to finish the job.
He then says to Todd Martin, "I'm not sure he's dead. I need you to cut his jugglers," and hands him a fillet knife.
Do it!
He does as Cordes requests him to do. He cuts Ed Postman's throat.
Police arrest Cordes and Martin the same day that Jackie confesses. They're charged with Ed's murder and booked into the Manatee County Jail. With no evidence of her involvement in the murder, Jackie is free to go. But police urge her to come clean to the Postmas.
They said, Jackie, it'd be better for you if you told them.
Hello?
They were only supposed to beat him up.
I said, what did he do that needed to be beat up over?
Because
She claimed that he raped her and was abusive and things, and I don't know if she was trying to get sympathy. Violent and rape? Wasn't him.
She goes, oh, please don't hate me. And I hung up. That was the last time I spoke with her.
Jackie's plea for sympathy falls on deaf ears, especially when another witness comes forward, blowing the case wide open.
And that's when everything started unfolding.
Ed Postma is found brutally murdered, and while his wife Jackie confesses to luring him there, she claims that her lover was just meant to scare him, not kill him. But an accomplice to the crime is about to come forward to explain what really happened that fateful night.
I cut his throat, but he was already...
Todd Martin admits that he and Michael Cordes drove to Winter Haven to meet Jackie on the night of Ed's murder. The plan, according to Todd, was to have Ed beaten up.
Jackie told this story about how abusive Ed Postma supposedly was to her.
But when Ed arrived in Duet and Michael shot him, all bets were off. Todd explains why he was the one to cut Ed's jugular and finish him off.
He feared for his life. I'd fear for my life, too, if some, lifelong felon had just shot someone and told me to slit someone's neck.
But after the killing, Todd realizes he's been duped. He now believes that Michael Cordes and Jackie Postma planned to kill Ed from the very beginning.
Well, the testimony out of Todd Martin was that Michael Cordes wanted Todd Martin to have a hand in it and to have his hands dirty, so to speak, to be part of it.
Meanwhile, Michael Cordes continues to proclaim his innocence.
He acknowledged the affair. He acknowledged having gone to Winter Haven in his truck.
Yes, we went out there. I went out there with Todd Martin. I passed out in my truck. Whatever happened, Todd Martin did. And the only witness to contradict that was Todd Martin.
And Jackie? Her story is about to fall apart. Two of her friends contact the cops and say she came to them with a killer proposition.
She had tried to hire some other people to murder him. Instead of her and her boyfriend doing it themselves, they tried to hire someone.
Just go to plan B.
But the would-be killers turn her down.
When the other people found out Ed was murdered, they went to the police and said, hey, this lady tried to hire us to have him murdered. And that's when everything started unfolding.
Police arrest Jackie. The charge, first-degree murder. The Postmas are shocked.
Never would I have thought that she had it in her to do that. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that she would have the coldness in her heart to have been murdered.
Jackie's motive is one of the oldest in the book.
There was a life insurance policy that she stood to benefit from. A divorce wouldn't do that for her. A death would, unfortunately.
Jackie's claims that she was abused by Ed are quickly dismissed.
We found nothing to substantiate those allegations.
She hadn't complained about it to anybody. She hadn't confided in anybody about it. There were no signs of it. There were no reports of it. It was totally contradicted by the evidence.
While in prison awaiting trial, Jackie gives birth to a baby boy. Her sister Lori takes custody of the baby, as well as the other children.
I got down there when he was 8 or 9 days old. We waited for the airline regulation of 15 days old, they have to be, and I brought him home.
If DNA testing reveals the baby is Michael Cordes's, it gives Jackie an additional motive to want Ed out of the picture.
So that may have been another impetus to her to have her husband killed before he started seeing signs of a pregnancy.
She goes, in my heart, I know it's Ed's. I said, well, if you were with this guy, how do you know? How do you know for sure?
It was a coin toss. I could never tell which way or the other.
DNA tests prove that Jackie's baby is in fact Ed's, not Michael's. For the Postmas, the news is bittersweet.
He'll never be able to feel his hair, look in his eyes, feel his hands, and be able to tell him how much he loves him.
His son's never gonna know. That's really hard.
10 months after the murder, Todd Martin pleads guilty to being an accessory to murder. He gets 12 years in exchange for testifying against Jackie and Michael. Separate trials for Jackie and Michael begin later that July.
The police had a flurry of phone calls between her and Michael Cordes before the murder and immediately after the murder. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
For Jackie, the most damning evidence is her ill-fated attempt to get two outsiders to do the job first.
The woman asked like 2 people like a couple weeks before to have the man killed. I mean, she's not winning awards for Criminal of the Year. At least, wait a while and don't ask friends.
Almost a year to the day after Ed's slaying, Jackie Postma is convicted of second-degree murder.
It carries with it a maximum of life in prison, and that's what she got.
I should hope she'd repent. I really do.
I think she's the most disgusting, vile thing on earth.
Because the gun was never found, the jury just can't prove Michael's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Cordes gets 7 years for violating his parole on an unrelated charge.
And we just sat there. I don't even remember the jury leaving. I don't remember the judge leaving. I don't remember Cord's family leaving. I don't remember anybody leaving. We were just sitting there.
Or a greater man would probably say they could live with it. I guess I'm not that great.
With Michael, it dumbfounded me. But it doesn't surprise me, things happen in court systems.
As a therapist and a mother, this story makes me very angry because there are a lot of women in this world who would kill to have kids, would kill to have a great man, and she destroyed all of the goodness that had been given to her.
As much as I believe in our system of justice, the fact that Michael is not paying for Ed's murder makes me very angry.
Ed's family is still picking up the pieces.
I miss him bad. Miss him real bad. Don't know why anything could have happened to such a good guy like him.
We just never had a chance to get alone where I could grab him and talk to him to ourselves and go, hey, what's really going on, Ed? I never got a chance to do that.
I tell her youngest son all the time that he looks just like his daddy, and his daddy would love him unbelievably. I tell his daughter that she's the most beautiful thing, and he would be guarding her like a hawk because she's so pretty.
To Carla, it's a life left unfulfilled.
When they were rebuilding motorcycles, when Ren was rebuilding his and Ed was rebuilding his, the game plan was that they were both going to get the bikes up and running, and we were going to go down to the Florida Keys and go camping together. That was the goal. The bikes never got finished.
There's a deeply ingrained image in the collective imagination when we think of the Pacific Islands. We readily picture stretches of pristine sand, crystal clear waters reflecting a cloudless sky, a gentle breeze rustling through the palm trees, and an island peace that nothing seems able to disturb. It's paradise on earth, a refuge far from the turmoil, violence, and darkness of the major continents. Yet, behind this idyllic postcard, behind the tropical warmth and the wild beauty of the landscapes, sometimes lies a much darker reality. The very geography that offers escape can transform into a prison without walls. On an island, when horror strikes, there is nowhere to flee. The ocean, which was a promise of freedom, suddenly becomes an insurmountable barrier. Today, we turn our attention to Guam. It's a tiny island territory, an isolated dot in the vastness of the Pacific, home to a population of approximately 170,000. 170,000 people. On the scale of a global metropolis, that's just a neighborhood, a suburb, a fraction of the urban bustle. But on an island, that number represents a closed ecosystem, an extremely tightly knit community where lives constantly intersect, where faces are familiar, and where secrets have an unfortunate tendency to stifle under the weight of the tropical humidity. Unlike other territories like American Samoa, where acts of extreme violence remain statistical anomalies almost non-existent, Guam has a higher crime rate. Of course, compiling 100 criminal cases of absolute horror, the kind that chill the blood and haunt generations, would be an impossible task given the historical record of such a small population. Evil, however, doesn't need volume to leave its mark. It only needs to strike with enough intensity to leave an indelible scar on the collective memory. The court records and historical files of the Guam Police Department are not overflowing with serial murders or ritual massacres, but the existing cases are steeped in brutal, often visceral violence. It is a violence that contrasts so sharply with the island's expected tranquility that it becomes all the more terrifying. The environment itself seems to play a macabre role in these tragedies. The island is covered in dense, impenetrable jungles, a tangle of tropical greenery that can swallow a secret in a matter of hours. Beneath this verdant surface lies a complex network of limestone caves, ancient, dark, and silent rock formations. These natural features have, over the decades, served as a backdrop or silent accomplices to acts of unspeakable cruelty. Imagine, for example, the psychological terror engendered by what the local law enforcement agency, the Guam Police Department, sometimes calls the cave murders. After committing the unspeakable, some murderers have sought refuge in these complex limestone formations, burrowing deep into the island's heart to escape justice. The search then becomes a logistical and human nightmare. Police officers must venture into the darkness, navigating a labyrinth of stone. And when victims are left there, the horror reaches its peak. The tropical climate, with its oppressive heat and constant humidity, relentlessly accelerates the decomposition process. The bodies found in these remote areas, far from prying eyes and light, are often nothing more than unrecognizable remains, altered by nature before forensic science can even begin to offer its initial findings. The sight of these corpses, reported in court records, remains a profoundly traumatic experience, a persistent image in the minds of those who must confront it. This brutality is not an exclusively modern phenomenon. It has deep roots in the island's history, spanning eras and political regimes. Let's go back in time, well before the age of scientific investigations, to the Spanish colonial period. The year is 1886. The scene unfolds on a rancho, a farm located in Tudo. It was there that Marcos Antalen met his death in circumstances of appalling savagery. He wasn't simply killed, he was massacred. The medical and legal reports from that distant era, though lacking modern terminology, describe a scene of unimaginable violence. Marcos Antalen's body bore the marks of 18 separate blows, 18 sharp, piercing blows inflicted with a machete. The weapon, an everyday tool of farming, had been transformed into an instrument of carnage. The assailants were a group of prisoners from the Philippines, convicts and displaced men whose very presence on the island was a consequence of the colonial policies of the time. The death of Marcos Antalen was more than just a bloody incident. By its sheer brutality, by the staggering number of machete blows that mutilated the victim, this affair shook the foundations of island society. It triggered a profound and painful crisis of confidence between the indigenous population, deeply wounded by the loss of one of their own in such circumstances, and the Spanish colonial administration, suddenly perceived as incapable of guaranteeing security or, worse, as responsible for importing this violence. A century later, the nature of the violence had evolved, adapting to modernity, but the fundamental brutality remained. The 1980s in Guam were marked by an insidious shadow, a pervasive fear that seeped into the daily lives of the inhabitants, especially the women. This was the decade of Eligio Adriatico. In the island's criminal history, serial killers are an anomaly, a chilling rarity. Adriatico was that rarity. He didn't act on a single impulse or after an altercation gone wrong. He stalked, attacked, and killed repeatedly. His targets were women caught in moments of vulnerability, struck unexpectedly. The files describe crime scenes of extreme savagery. The victims weren't simply murdered to silence them. They suffered disproportionate violence, revealing the hatred and sadism of the perpetrator. The fear of knowing a predator was on the loose, choosing his victims at random according to his macabre impulses, paralyzed the community. The capture of Eligio Adriatico and his life sentence brought relief, the illusion that the monster was gone for good. Yet the past has a cruel way of resurfacing. In 2024, decades after the prison gates had closed behind him, Adriatico filed an appeal against his sentence, sending shockwaves across the island. Wounds thought to be healed were reopened. The mere thought that this man, responsible for some of the most horrific murders in Guam's history, could challenge his punishment reignited the pain of the families and the anger of a community that had not forgotten the darkness of the 1980s. That same decade, barely a year after the shadow of Adriatico began to loom, another tragedy shook the island's nightlife. On January 2, 1987, the Brass Lantern Bar became the scene of a double murder that stunned the locals. Mike Weiss and Rose Perez were found dead inside the establishment. The details of the crime scene told a story of terrifying brutality. Both victims had been stabbed multiple times. Their lifeless bodies lay drained of blood, bearing the marks of a murderous rage that seemed to have no end. Once again, it wasn't the deaths themselves that were most shocking, but the method, the sheer number of stab wounds, the unrestrained brutality. The case wasn't solved overnight. For almost a year, uncertainty lingered, a difficult year of investigation, hampered by fear and silence. The decisive turning point came not from a miraculous scientific discovery, but from human testimony, fragile and terrified. A key witness, who had been violently threatened by the perpetrators to buy his silence, finally found the courage to speak. It was this testimony that led to the downfall of Henry Santos and his accomplice, John Solis Cruz, putting an end to the anguish of an investigation that had seemingly reached a dead end. But not all tragedies find resolution. Some wounds remain open, bleeding silently into the fabric of the community, becoming what the legal system, with clinical coldness, calls cold cases unsolved cases. This was the cruel fate that befell Nicholas Reyes Tolentino in 2014. Tolentino was a 62-year-old man who owned a barbershop, Tolentino's Beauty Salon, located in the busy Hoffa Adai Exchange shopping area. The contrast between the place's space for daily interactions, casual conversations, and community life and the horror that unfolded there is striking. It was his own daughter who made the gruesome discovery. Upon entering her father's salon, she was met with a nightmarish vision. Nicholas Tolentino lay in a vast pool of blood, his body riddled with stab wounds. The scream of utter distress, shock, and vocal agony that the victim's daughter uttered upon discovering her father's body still echoes in the memories of neighboring shopkeepers. That cry was not merely the expression of sudden grief. It was the soundtrack to an incomprehensible atrocity that had invaded a familiar space. Despite the unprecedented violence of the attack and the obvious presence of physical evidence amidst the bloody carnage, the killer's identity remains, to this day, an unfathomable mystery. The murder of Nicholas Tolentino remains one of Guam's most notorious and disturbing cold cases, a constant reminder that justice is not always guaranteed. We are faced with fragmented narratives, with lives torn away in moments of pure terror. From the machete of Filipino convicts in 1886 to the anonymous knives of 2014, from the methodical sadism of a serial killer to the savagery of a double execution in a bar. Every drop of blood spilled on this island tells a story that postcards will never show. Behind the warmth of the island welcome lies the cold, metallic edge of the blade. Behind the murmur of the waves lies the heavy silence of the limestone caves concealing their dead. This podcast is not intended to glorify violence or turn pain into mere entertainment. Our goal is to walk in the footsteps of those who did not survive, to examine the facts with the utmost rigor and the deepest empathy. We will dissect these events, scrutinize the investigations, listen to the silences, and analyze the human failings that lead to such extremes. For to understand the true nature of a place, one must not only look at the light that illuminates it, but also dare to plunge one's gaze into the shadows it casts. It is into these shadows, thick and still, that we will now venture, step by step, to try to understand the incomprehensible. This journey into the heart of the island's darkness has only just begun. The island has its secrets, and the land, even washed by torrential rains, always ends up remembering the imprint of tragedy. To truly understand the magnitude of a violent crime, we must first look closely at the lives it has irreparably extinguished. A victim is never merely a name printed on a police report, nor are they just another statistic filed away in a dusty cabinet of unsolved mysteries. They were living, breathing individuals with daily routines, deep familial connections, future aspirations, and a profound sense of belonging to their environment. In a geographically isolated place like Guam, the concept of community is not merely a modern social construct. It is a fundamental method of survival and existence. The island is small, the population is tightly knit, and the degrees of separation between any two individuals are incredibly thin. When a life is violently taken in such an intimate setting, the ripples of grief do not just touch the immediate family members, they wash over the entire island, leaving an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of the population. The tragedy is magnified exponentially by the intimacy of the location. A murder on this island is a brutal violation of a shared home, a terrifying disruption of a fragile, interconnected ecosystem where mutual trust is the accepted currency of daily life. The victims we are examining today represent vastly different eras, disparate cultural backgrounds, and unique personal circumstances, yet they are all tragically bound together by the sudden, terrifying manner in which their futures were stolen from them without warning. We must begin our journey into the past by traveling back to the late 19th century, to an era when the island was firmly under Spanish colonial administration and daily life was deeply rooted in the unforgiving soil. Marcos Antalen was a man whose existence was tied to the land. He owned and operated an agricultural estate in the rural area known as Todo. To understand Marcos is to understand the agrarian heartbeat of early island life. His days were undoubtedly dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, the predictable cycles of the tropical seasons, and the relentless physical demands of manual farming. His agricultural estate was not just his workplace. It was his sanctuary, his personal domain, a quiet place where he cultivated life and provided for his basic existence. In the year 1886, the area of Todo was far removed from the bustling commercial centers we see today. It was a place of isolation, of quiet daily labor, and of a deep, unbroken connection to the natural world. Marcos Antalen was a figure woven seamlessly into the fabric of this rural landscape, a man whose existence was defined by the steady, peaceful rhythms of agricultural dedication. However, the complex historical context of that specific era brought an unnatural and highly dangerous element to this peaceful agrarian setting. The colonial authorities frequently utilized the island as a remote destination for convicts transported across the ocean from the Philippines. These were desperate men who had been entirely uprooted from their lives, condemned by the state, and forced into a harsh existence far from their own homes. The sudden presence of these prisoners introduced a volatile and unpredictable dynamic into the local indigenous community. For Marcos Antalen, this newly introduced dynamic proved to be absolutely fatal. His estate, a place meant for growth and sustenance, was violently transformed into the site of a horrific ambush. The sheer brutality of the attack against him, characterized by 18 devastatingly deep strikes from a heavy machete, speaks to a profound rage and a complete, terrifying disregard for human life. Marcos was not just murdered, he was obliterated by a group of men who likely saw him either as a symbol of local authority or simply as a vulnerable obstacle in an unfamiliar and hostile land. His death was a deeply traumatic event for the native population, completely shattering the illusion of safety on their own soil and highlighting the profound vulnerabilities of living under a colonial system that imported dangerous elements into their peaceful farming communities. Exactly a century later, the physical landscape of the island had transformed significantly with modernization. Yet the vulnerability of its everyday residents remained a tragic and inescapable constant. During the 1980s, a dark, suffocating shadow fell over the female population of the island. The victims targeted by Eligio Adriatico were ordinary women simply living their everyday lives, navigating a modern society that they firmly believed to be safe and secure. We must pause to consider the profound terror that gripped the entire community during this dark period. These women were not engaging in any high-risk behaviors. They were simply existing within their own private spaces, resting in their homes, or moving normally about their daily routines. The concept of a home is universally understood as an ultimate refuge, a safe haven where one can lower their defenses and feel entirely secure from the outside world. The attacker completely shattered this fundamental human assumption. By targeting innocent women in sudden, unprovoked, and highly violent attacks, he essentially weaponized their own comfortable environments against them. The psychological profile of his victims is one of tragic normalcy that was disrupted by unimaginable horror. The women who suffered so terribly represent a deeply disturbing reality about predatory violence in isolated communities. They were clearly chosen not for who they were as specific individuals, but simply because they were physically accessible and vulnerable to his specific, deeply twisted pathology. Each sudden attack was a profound violation of physical autonomy and bodily integrity. The extreme violence inflicted upon these women was not merely a means to an end, but a terrifying expression of deep-seated sadism and hatred. For the grieving families of these victims, the pain was heavily compounded by the utter senselessness of the acts and the haunting knowledge that their loved ones had endured moments of absolute, paralyzing terror before their lives were violently extinguished. The legacy of these women is unfortunately tied forever to the name of their attacker, but their individual lives, their quiet dignity, and their completely unfulfilled potentials are the true, enduring tragedies that must be remembered when examining the darkness of that decade. As the decade of the 1980s drew to a close, another profound tragedy struck directly at the heart of the island's social life. The year was 1987, and the setting was the Brass Lantern Bar. In any thriving community, local establishments like this serve as absolutely crucial gathering spaces. They are lively places where exhausted workers go to unwind after a long day, where lifelong friends meet to celebrate milestones, and where the heavy emotional burdens of daily life are temporarily lifted through shared laughter and music. Mike Weiss and Rose Perez were simply two individuals seeking precisely this kind of normal human respite. On the 2nd of January, a time usually reserved for optimistic new beginnings and hopeful resolutions, they found themselves in what should have been an environment of warm camaraderie and relaxation. We can easily picture the atmosphere, the ambient noise of cheerful conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the dim lighting designed specifically to soothe the senses. Mike and Rose were an integral part of this tapestry of ordinary life, looking for nothing more than a pleasant, uneventful evening out. The abrupt transition from the lively, comforting atmosphere of a local tavern to a scene of extreme, bloody carnage is almost incomprehensible to the human mind. When intense violence erupts in a space completely dedicated to leisure, it carries a very specific kind of psychological shock. Mike Weiss and Rose Perez were subjected to a frenzied, multi-stab attack that ended both of their lives prematurely and brutally. They were not combatants in a conflict. They were completely unarmed patrons. Their violent deaths within the familiar walls of the bar violently stripped away the comforting community illusion that public social spaces are inherently safe zones. For nearly an entire year, the devastated families of Mike and Rose languished in a state of agonizing, paralyzing uncertainty as investigators struggled desperately to identify the perpetrators. The victims were reduced to fading memories and tagged police evidence, their vibrant daily lives replaced by a grim, clinical narrative of bloodshed. Remembering Mike and Rose accurately requires us to acknowledge the terrifying fragility of human joy and the devastating, blinding speed with which ordinary moments can descend into absolute chaos. Moving forward into the 21st century, the nature of the island economy and community structure had evolved even further, but the human capacity for sudden, senseless loss unfortunately remained. In 2014, the tight-knit community was deeply shaken by the brutal murder of Nicholas Reyes Tolentino. At 62 years old, Nicholas was a respected man who had dedicated his entire adult life to building a successful small business and providing a stable foundation for his family. He was the proud proprietor of the Tolentino Beauty Salon, situated within the bustling, highly trafficked area of the Hoffa Adai Exchange. A community beauty salon is a unique sociological environment. It is a place of physical transformation, certainly, but more importantly, it is a vital hub of intimate daily conversation, deep community trust, and regular, comforting social interaction. Clients sit in the chair and openly share their lives, their deepest worries, and their greatest joys. Nicholas, as the owner and daily operator, would have been a central, stabilizing figure in this microcosm. A highly familiar and deeply trusted face to countless individuals who passed through his doors over the years. Nicholas was not just a dedicated businessman, he was a loving father. The overwhelming tragedy of his death is inextricably linked to the unimaginable psychological trauma experienced by his own daughter. The salon, a place that should have always represented her father's hard work, his enduring legacy, and his honest livelihood, was suddenly transformed into a literal slaughterhouse. We must deeply empathize with the psychological devastation of a child walking into a highly familiar, brightly lit commercial space only to discover the beloved patriarch of their family lying dead in a massive pool of blood, the tragic victim of a frenzied, unprovoked knife attack. The sheer number of stab wounds inflicted upon a 62-year-old man working peacefully in his own shop points to a highly aggressive, deeply personal, or extremely chaotic physical confrontation. The profound, echoing grief of his daughter, whose agonizing screams immediately alerted the neighboring businesses to the horror, perfectly mirrors the collective shock of an entire community that simply could not fathom such extreme brutality occurring in a place of everyday commerce. Nicholas Tolentino represents the hardworking, honest foundation of society, a man whose quiet, highly productive life was abruptly and violently terminated, leaving a massive emotional void that remains unfilled as his case stays agonizingly unresolved to this very day. Finally, we must turn our solemn attention to those unfortunate individuals whose stories are even more obscured by the deep shadows of the island topography. The victims of the murders that culminated in the hidden limestone caves and the dense, unforgiving tropical jungles represent a particularly haunting demographic. These are individuals whose final, terrifying moments were spent in profound physical isolation, surrounded entirely by the beautiful but completely indifferent forces of tropical nature. When a perpetrator deliberately chooses to hide a body in the deep, dark recesses of a cave or the impenetrable, thorny thicket of the jungle, they are essentially relying on the harsh environment to act as a silent accomplice to their crime. The victims in these horrific scenarios are subjected to a profound secondary indignity. Their physical remains left entirely to the rapid, destructive, and erasing elements of a hot, heavily humid climate. The exact identities of some of these individuals may be lost forever to time, their entire life stories tragically reduced to fragmented forensic evidence and whispered, frightening local legends. To end up in such a desolate, frightening place implies a terrifying journey, whether violently coerced or completely involuntary, taking the victim far away from the safety of populated areas and deep into the wild, untamed interior of the island. These victims were entirely removed from any realistic possibility of rescue, intervention, or mercy. Their extreme physical isolation amplifies the sheer horror of their ultimate fate. The psychological terror of fully realizing one is completely trapped in a remote, inescapable environment with a violent, determined aggressor is a nightmare entirely beyond human comprehension. As we analyze these brutal cases, we must always hold a sacred space for these nameless or less documented victims. They serve as a constant, somber reminder that the breathtaking, scenic landscapes of the island can sometimes mask a profound, terrifying darkness, and that wild nature, while awe-inspiring, offers absolutely no sanctuary to those who are actively being hunted. Understanding the lives, the simple daily routines, and the profound human vulnerabilities of all these victims is the crucial, necessary first step in fully comprehending the immense weight of the crimes that extinguished them. It is only by deeply recognizing their inherent humanity that we can truly begin to measure the terrifying depths of the depravity that took them away from this world. The transition from the ordinary to the horrific is rarely marked by a grand warning. There is no shift in the weather, no sudden darkening of the tropical sky to signal the impending arrival of absolute brutality. The sun continues to beat down on the island of Guam. The ocean breeze continues its gentle sweep across the coastline, and the daily rhythms of life proceed with comforting predictability. But beneath this veneer of tropical tranquility, the mechanics of extreme violence begin to turn, silently and inevitably. The incidents we are about to examine are not merely statistical anomalies in a police ledger. They are vivid, terrifying explosions of human savagery that shattered the illusion of island safety. They are moments where the fragile boundaries of civilization were completely obliterated, leaving behind scenes of unimaginable carnage. We must approach these moments not with morbid fascination, but with a profound, somber respect for the sheer terror experienced by those who found themselves trapped in the path of destruction. In the rural expanse of Toto during the year 1886, the environment was defined by grueling physical labor and the quiet isolation of the agricultural lifestyle. Marcos Antalin was immersed in this environment, his attention focused entirely on the demands of his agrarian estate. The incident that ended his life did not unfold with the rapid, mechanical efficiency of a modern crime. It was a slow, deliberate, and fiercely intimate expression of violence. A group of Filipino convicts, men hardened by displacement and desperate circumstances, descended upon his property. The exact catalyst for the confrontation remains lost to the dense fog of colonial history, but the physical reality of the encounter is etched forever into the historical record. The attack was initiated with terrifying suddenness. The weapon of choice was not a firearm, which kills with sterile distance, but a machete, an instrument of heavy agricultural labor repurposed for human slaughter. The first strike would have brought agonizing pain and immediate shock, instantly transforming the peaceful farm into a bloody battleground. But the attackers did not stop after neutralizing the threat. They unleashed a torrent of absolute fury. The heavy steel blade was raised and brought down with sickening force again and again. 18 distinct, devastating wounds were inflicted upon Marcos. The sheer physical exertion required to strike a human being 18 times with a machete speaks to a collective frenzy, a complete abandonment of all human restraint. The soil of the estate, meant to nurture crops, was deeply saturated with the blood of its owner. Marcos was hacked to death in a sustained barrage of overwhelming violence. His body subjected to a level of mutilation that shocked the entire indigenous population and left a lasting scar on the historical memory of the island. Almost precisely 1 century later, the methodology of murder had evolved, but the underlying capacity for uninhibited savagery remained entirely unchanged. The 1980s saw the emergence of a terror that struck at the very heart of domestic security. Eligio Adriatico did not attack in the open fields. He brought the nightmare directly into the private sanctuaries of his victims. To comprehend the horror of his crimes, we must visualize the terrifying intimacy of a home invasion. It is the dead of night. The island is completely blanketed in darkness, and the humid air is heavy and still. In a quiet residence in Dededo, a woman is completely submerged in the vulnerability of deep sleep, entirely unaware that the locked doors and closed windows of her home have failed to protect her. Adriatico moved with the silent, predatory grace of a man entirely consumed by his darkest impulses. The incident begins the moment the victim is jolted awake, not by the morning sun, but by the terrifying realization that she is no longer alone. The psychological shock of seeing a stranger standing in the darkness of one's own bedroom is immediately followed by the visceral, explosive reality of physical violence. Adriatico did not simply seek to kill, he sought to obliterate. The attacks were characterized by a horrifying degree of overkill. He descended upon his victims with a bladed weapon, striking with a frenzied, chaotic energy. The confined space of the bedroom became a trap, the familiar walls offering absolutely no avenue for escape. The victims fought desperately for their lives, but the sheer ferocity of the assault was insurmountable. The terrifying sound of the struggle, the desperate gasps for air, and the sickening impact of the blade would have filled a small room, creating an atmosphere of absolute, paralyzing dread. Adriatico left behind scenes of unfathomable carnage, his victims bearing the horrific physical evidence of his sadistic rage. Their safe havens permanently violated and stained with unimaginable tragedy. This localized epidemic of violence was not confined to the dark, isolated hours of the night. It also aggressively infiltrated the brightly lit, deeply social spaces of the community. On the 2nd of January, 1987, the Brass Lantern Bar was functioning perfectly as a vibrant center of local nightlife. The atmosphere was undoubtedly loud, characterized by the overlapping sounds of lively conversation, the rhythmic pulse of music, and the clinking of glasses. Mike Weiss and Rose Perez were entirely immersed in this jovial environment. The transition from celebration to massacre happened with blinding, disorienting speed. The incident at the Brass Lantern was not a silent, stealthy assassination. It was a chaotic, bloody eruption of hostility in a crowded space. The physical confrontation escalated rapidly, the sudden flash of a knife instantly silencing the surrounding ambient noise of the bar. Henry Santos and John Solis Cruz unleashed a terrifying assault upon the two unarmed patrons. The sheer panic that instantly gripped the establishment must have been absolute. The tight confines of the bar, filled with tables, chairs, and terrified bystanders, turned into a chaotic maze of screaming patrons and desperate attempts to flee. Amidst this sheer pandemonium, Mike and Rose were systematically hunted down. The attackers utilized their blades with lethal, terrifying efficiency, inflicting multiple deep, penetrating wounds upon both victims. The physical trauma was catastrophic. The vibrant, living energy of Mike and Rose was violently forcefully drained from them, their bodies collapsing onto the floor of the establishment. The immediate aftermath was a scene of profound, stunned horror. The music may have still been playing, but the primary sound was the collective gasp of a traumatized community witnessing the complete, bloody desecration of their local gathering space. The Brass Lantern, a place of joy, was instantly transformed into a slaughterhouse. The floor slick with the combined blood of two entirely innocent individuals whose only mistake was seeking a night of simple entertainment. The profound vulnerability of ordinary individuals in public commercial spaces was tragically reiterated decades later, deeply scarring the modern era of the island. In the year 2014, the Hoffa Adai Exchange was a bustling center of daily commerce, filled with the constant movement of shoppers and the steady hum of surrounding businesses. Inside the Tolentino Beauty Salon, the environment was highly controlled, brightly illuminated, and deeply familiar. Nicholas Reyes Tolentino, a 62-year-old man, was engaged in the ordinary routines of his business. The sheer audacity of the attack against him lies in its specific location and timing. The assailant completely ignored the inherent risks of committing a brutal crime in a highly populated commercial zone. The incident unfolded entirely within the confines of the salon. The attacker engaged Nicholas with a terrifying level of close-quarters aggression. A knife was drawn, and the 62-year-old businessman was subjected to a sudden, overwhelming barrage of strikes. We can only imagine the desperate, completely futile attempts to defend himself against a younger, entirely enraged, or perhaps deeply deranged attacker. The physical struggle would have violently overturned the tools of his trade, knocking over chairs and shattering the peaceful ambience of the shop. The attacker stabbed Nicholas repeatedly, ensuring that the wounds were completely fatal. The sheer volume of blood released during the frantic attack pooled massively across the floor of the salon, creating a gruesome, expanding crimson perimeter around the fallen victim. The assailant then fled the scene, melting seamlessly back into the surrounding commercial chaos. The true, agonizing climax of this incident occurred moments later with the arrival of the daughter of the victim. Her completely unsuspecting entry into the shop was met with a visual assault of absolute horror. The discovery of her beloved father mutilated and lying lifeless in a massive pool of his own blood triggered a biological response of pure, unfiltered agony. Her scream, a piercing, devastating vocalization of complete psychological destruction, shattered the normal noise of the Hoffa Adai Exchange, permanently etching the horror of the incident into the minds of every single person who heard it. While these incidents occurred within the structured environments of homes, bars, and businesses, there is another, deeply sinister category of violence that utilized the raw, untamed geography of the island itself. The incidents that culminated in the dense tropical jungles and deep limestone caves of Guam represent a terrifying descent into primal darkness. In these specific cases, the initial act of murder was only the beginning of a prolonged, horrifying ordeal. The perpetrators, seeking to entirely erase the evidence of their crimes, dragged their victims away from the safety of civilization and deep into the suffocating embrace of the island interior. The physical exertion required to transport a human body through the dense, unforgiving undergrowth of a tropical jungle is immense, indicating a cold, highly calculated determination to conceal the atrocity. The victims were discarded in the deep, lightless recesses of the limestone cave systems, their bodies completely abandoned to the harsh, unforgiving elements. The extreme heat and pervasive humidity of the tropical climate immediately began their relentless work, accelerating the devastating process of physical decomposition. The horror of these specific incidents lies not just in the violence that ended the lives, but in the profound, deeply terrifying isolation of the aftermath. These victims were swallowed entirely by the island, their final resting places chosen specifically for their terrifying obscurity. The silent, ancient stones of the caves and the dense, twisting roots of the jungle became the only witnesses to their tragic ends, preserving the terrible secrets until the inevitable. Gruesome discoveries were finally made. Every single one of these brutal incidents, whether bathed in the bright lights of a modern commercial center or hidden deep within the shadowy, ancient limestone depths of a tropical cave, serves as a deeply harrowing testament to the terrifying capacity for violence that can erupt, suddenly and completely without mercy, within the confined, inescapably intimate borders of this small island community. The sheer brutality of these violent acts forces us to deeply question the fragile nature of our everyday security. When an individual steps out of their home to manage a farm, or goes to a local bar for a drink, or simply opens their shop for the day, there is an unspoken, fundamental social contract that guarantees their basic physical safety. The incidents detailed here represent the absolute, terrifying rupture of that essential contract. The victims were thrust into a sudden, violently chaotic reality where the established rules of human empathy and basic decency were completely suspended. The perpetrators of these heinous acts operated in a terrifying void of morality driven by dark, incomprehensible impulses that entirely overwhelmed any sense of human restraint. Whether driven by the desperate rage of displaced convicts in the 19th century, the deeply twisted, sadistic pathology of a serial predator operating in the dark, or the sudden, explosive, and completely inexplicable violence of a modern-day stabbing, the core resulting tragedy remains exactly the same. The life force of the victims was violently, aggressively extinguished, leaving behind nothing but deeply traumatized families, heavily blood-stained crime scenes, and a profound, lingering sense of collective community vulnerability. As the immediate, blinding shock of the initial violent incidents slowly began to fade into a cold, terrifying reality, the immense, daunting burden of comprehension and resolution shifted entirely onto the shoulders of the local authorities. The blood had been irreversibly spilled, the unforgivable crimes had been conclusively committed, and the terrifying, silent aftermath now demanded an immediate, forceful, and deeply thorough response. The arduous, complex, and highly fraught process of navigating through the chaotic, bloody debris of these horrific events to find a semblance of truth and justice was about to begin, ushering in a completely new phase of anxiety and desperate determination for the deeply scarred island. When the echo of violence finally fades and the blood begins to dry under the relentless tropical sun, a completely different kind of struggle begins. This is the agonizing, meticulous, and often entirely frustrating process of the criminal investigation. On an island like Guam, the investigative landscape is defined by a unique set of geographic and social paradoxes. On one hand, the physical boundaries of the ocean create a natural containment zone, theoretically trapping a perpetrator within a highly limited geographical area. The killer cannot simply cross a state line or disappear into the vast expanse of a massive continent. They are bound by the surrounding waters, forced to remain within the tightly woven fabric of the local community. On the other hand, this exact same intimacy can become the greatest obstacle to uncovering the truth. The island is deeply interconnected by complex networks of family ties, lifelong friendships, and generational loyalties. When a horrific crime occurs, an impenetrable wall of silence can quickly descend, built not necessarily out of malice, but out of a profound, paralyzing fear of reprisal and a deep-seated reluctance to condemn one of their own. The detectives of the Guam Police Department, across multiple generations and distinct historical eras, have been forced to navigate this incredibly delicate social minefield while simultaneously battling the harsh, unforgiving physical elements that actively conspire to destroy critical forensic evidence. To fully comprehend the incredible evolution and the enduring frustrations of the investigative process, we must first look back at the rudimentary methods employed during the Spanish colonial era in 1886. Following the absolute massacre of Marcos and Talon on his agricultural estate in Toto, local authorities were faced with a scene of utter devastation but possessed almost none of the modern tools we consider essential today. There was no crime scene tape, no fingerprint dusting, and absolutely no concept of genetic analysis. The investigation was an exercise in raw, physical tracking and basic human intelligence gathering. The staggering violence of the attack, characterized by 18 distinct machete wounds, immediately indicated multiple attackers driven by an overwhelming, frenzied aggression. The investigators had to rely on the immediate physical evidence left in the dirt and the testimonies of the terrified rural population. Suspicion quickly narrowed down upon the displaced Filipino convicts, a demographic that already existed on the absolute fringes of the colonial society. The process of identifying and apprehending the specific individuals responsible for hacking Marcos to death was less about scientific deduction and more about brute force policing and rapid mobilization of colonial authority. However, catching the perpetrators did not magically heal the deep wounds inflicted upon the community. The investigation itself inadvertently exposed a massive, terrifying flaw in the societal structure, triggering a profound crisis of faith among the indigenous population. They realized that the very administrative system supposed to protect them had directly imported the lethal danger that destroyed a peaceful farmer. The resolution of the case, while administratively successful in finding the killers, offered absolutely no lasting comfort, leaving behind a lingering, heavy atmosphere of mutual distrust and profound social anxiety. Exactly 1 century later, the investigative paradigm had shifted dramatically, yet the terrifying pressure placed upon the detectives had only intensified. During the dark days of the 1980s, the Guam Police Department faced an unprecedented, absolute nightmare. They were hunting Eligio Adriatico, a predator who was systematically targeting and violently slaughtering women in the perceived safety of their own homes. The initial phases of this massive investigation were marked by deep, agonizing frustration and a terrifying inability to connect the seemingly random acts of extreme violence. Adriatico was a ghost, a man who possessed a completely unremarkable exterior, allowing him to blend seamlessly into the working-class background of the island. He did not leave behind obvious, theatrical clues, and the concept of forensic DNA profiling was still in its absolute infancy, completely unavailable to the detectives desperately working the island crime scenes. The investigators were forced to rely on traditional, highly painstaking methods of forensic collection. They crawled across heavily blood-stained bedroom floors, desperately searching for any microscopic trace of the intruder. The turning point in the Adriatico investigation did not come from a magical flash of absolute brilliance, but from sheer, grueling persistence and an incredible stroke of survivor resilience. Slowly, agonizingly, the police began to piece together tiny, seemingly insignificant fragments of physical evidence. A partial footprint left in the dirt outside a compromised window, a deeply personal item carelessly dropped by the fleeing killer in the chaotic aftermath of a brutal struggle. These microscopic clues began to form a hazy, terrifying silhouette of the suspect. But the absolute, definitive breakthrough, the crucial twist that finally brought the reign of terror to an end, came from the incredibly courageous testimony of a woman who had miraculously survived one of his terrifying attacks. Despite suffering immense physical trauma and profound psychological shock, she was able to provide the investigators with the critical details they desperately needed to narrow their focus. Her incredible bravery in reliving her darkest nightmare provided the essential human element that primitive forensics simply could not. The eventual capture of Adriatico was a monumental relief, but it highlighted the agonizing, slow pace of justice when facing a methodical, highly determined killer in an era before the immense power of modern scientific identification. The detectives who worked those gruesome scenes carried the heavy, unseen psychological burden of knowing that every single day the killer remained free. Another completely innocent life was in absolute, mortal danger. While the Adriatico case was eventually closed, other deeply violent incidents from that same era demonstrated how fear alone can completely paralyze an investigation for months on end. The brutal double homicide of Mike Weiss and Rose Perez at the Brass Lantern Bar in early 1987 presented a completely different kind of investigative puzzle. Unlike the solitary, hidden attacks of a serial predator, this was a massive, bloody explosion of violence that occurred in a public, highly social space. Logically, a crowded bar should have provided an abundance of willing witnesses. Yet, when the police arrived at the scene of the carnage, they were met with an impenetrable, deeply frustrating wall of absolute silence. The sheer brutality of the multiple stabbing attack had successfully achieved its secondary objective, which was to completely terrify the surrounding community into submission. The perpetrators, Henry Santos and John Solis Cruz, had utilized severe intimidation to ensure that no one dared to speak a word of what they had witnessed. For nearly an entire year, the Brass Lantern investigation languished in a state of agonizing, suspended animation. The detectives knew that the truth was locked inside the minds of the people who had been drinking in that bar, but they simply could not break through the thick, suffocating layers of communal terror. The families of Mike and Rose were forced to endure a month after agonizing month of absolute silence, their grief heavily compounded by the sickening knowledge that the killers were freely walking the exact same island streets. The dramatic twist in this maddeningly stagnant case finally occurred when the immense psychological weight of the secret simply became too heavy for one individual to bear. A key witness, who had been violently and repeatedly threatened by the suspects, finally reached a breaking point. Driven by a complex mixture of deeply ingrained guilt, sheer exhaustion, and an awakening sense of moral obligation, this individual finally stepped out of the shadows and provided the explosive testimony that shattered the entire criminal conspiracy. This sudden, dramatic revelation completely changed the trajectory of the investigation, allowing the police to rapidly execute the arrests of Santos and Cruz. This case serves as a powerful, deeply chilling reminder that even the most meticulous physical evidence collection can be rendered entirely useless if the local community itself is held hostage by the paralyzing grip of violent intimidation. As investigative techniques evolved into the modern era of the 21st century, the promise of scientific certainty seemed to offer a foolproof solution to violent crime. However, the deeply frustrating reality of the Nicholas Reyes Tolentino case in 2014 proved that technology alone cannot always overcome the chaotic variables of murder. When the 62-year-old beauty salon owner was violently stabbed to death in the middle of a bustling commercial exchange, the resulting crime scene was an absolute treasure trove of physical evidence. The sheer violence of the close quarters struggle had resulted in a massive loss of blood and widespread physical disruption within the enclosed space of the shop. Modern crime scene technicians possess the ability to collect high-resolution photographs, lift latent prints with chemical reagents, and extract highly complex DNA profiles from the smallest drops of fluid. Yet, despite this overwhelming arsenal of modern scientific capability, the investigation rapidly hit an invisible, impenetrable wall. The agonizing twist in the Tolentino case is the complete absence of a twist. The physical evidence exists, the location was public, the victim was deeply loved, yet the identity of the brutal attacker remains completely unknown. The detectives have meticulously sifted through the digital footprints of the area, analyzing security footage and interviewing countless individuals who passed through the busy commercial zone. But the killer seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but a devastated family and a deeply terrified business community. This specific case represents the ultimate, crushing frustration of the investigative process. It is a terrifying realization that even when armed with the most advanced scientific tools ever created, law enforcement can still be completely defeated by the sheer randomness of a violent act and the chilling ability of a perpetrator to slip through the smallest cracks of the system. The Tolentino case remains an open, bleeding wound, a cold case that actively mocks the illusion of modern security and serves as a constant, haunting reminder of the absolute limits of human deduction. Finally, we must examine the ultimate investigative nightmare, the terrifying scenarios where the perpetrators utilize the brutal, unforgiving geography of the island to actively destroy the evidence of their crimes. The so-called caveman murders present the Guam Police Department with logistical and scientific challenges that border on the impossible. When a killer drags a victim into the deep, lightless limestone cave systems or buries them beneath the dense, impenetrable canopy of the tropical jungle, they are essentially handing the investigation over to the destructive forces of nature. The search and recovery process alone is a grueling, highly dangerous physical ordeal. Detectives and search teams are forced to navigate treacherous, uneven terrain, descending into pitch-black subterranean networks where a single misstep can lead to severe injury. The sheer physical exhaustion of merely locating the scene is completely overwhelming. But the true, absolute horror of the investigation begins when the physical remains are finally located. The relentless heat, the pervasive, soaking humidity, and the incredibly active biological environment of the tropical climate act as a highly efficient, completely merciless disposal system. Forensic evidence that might have easily survived for years in a colder, drier climate is utterly obliterated in a matter of mere days. Soft tissues decompose with terrifying rapidity, entirely erasing critical wounds, defensive marks, and microscopic trace evidence. Investigators are frequently left with nothing more than skeletal remains, stripped entirely of the vital clues needed to reconstruct the final, terrifying moments of the victim. The process of identifying the cause of death, let alone isolating the DNA of the attacker, becomes a monumental, often entirely insurmountable scientific challenge. The island itself, with its breathtaking natural beauty, becomes the most effective, completely silent accomplice a murderer could ever hope for. The detectives are forced to fight not only against the cunning of a human killer, but against the relentless, erasing power of the earth itself. An agonizing battle where justice is often buried forever beneath the silent, ancient stones and the suffocating green shadows of the deep jungle. The transition from the investigative phase to the hallowed halls of the courtroom represents a critical shift in the pursuit of justice, moving from the chaotic, blood-stained reality of the crime scene to the sterile, highly structured environment of legal adjudication. In Guam, a territory where the American legal system intersects with deep-seated island traditions and complex historical legacies, the courtroom often becomes a place of intense emotional reckoning. It is here that the cold, clinical facts of an investigation are laid bare before a jury appears, and the harrowing testimonies of survivors and family members are permanently etched into the public record. The legal proceedings for the crimes we have examined were not merely administrative formalities. They were profound, often agonizing spectacles that forced the community to confront the darkest aspects of its own nature. The weight of these trials sat heavily upon the island, as the collective desire for retribution clashed with the rigorous, often slow-moving demands of due process. The earliest of these significant legal confrontations occurred in the late 19th century following the brutal massacre of Marcos and Talon in 1886. During this period, Guam was under Spanish colonial rule, and the judicial process was a reflection of that specific administrative structure. The trial of the Filipino convicts who had hacked the peaceful farmer to death was conducted with a sense of urgent, colonial severity. There was no complex jury selection or prolonged pretrial motions in the modern sense. The proceedings were swift and focused heavily on re-establishing the authority of the Crown. The evidence presented was visceral and undeniable, centered on the 18 horrific wounds inflicted upon the victim. For the indigenous population, the trial was a source of profound, bitter irony. They watched as a colonial government prosecuted men who would never have been on the island if not for that very government's penal policies. The sentencing of these men to harsh penalties was a foregone conclusion, but the legal victory did little to erase the deep-seated trauma. The trial served as a cold, bureaucratic finality to a tragedy that had already fundamentally altered the social landscape of Toto and the surrounding villages, leaving a legacy of skepticism toward the institutions that claimed to provide security. A century later, the legal drama surrounding Eligio Adriatico in 1987 brought a different kind of intensity to the Guam Superior Court. The island had transitioned to a modern American legal framework, and the prosecution of a suspected serial predator required a monumental effort of organization and courage. The courtroom was packed with spectators, the air thick with the accumulated fear and anger of a decade. The central pillar of the prosecution's case was the testimony of the survivor who had looked into the eyes of her attacker and lived to tell the tale. When she took the stand, the silence in the room was absolute. Her account of the sudden, violent intrusion into her home and the subsequent struggle for her life provided a human heartbeat to the piles of forensic evidence and crime scene photographs. Adriatico himself sat through the proceedings with a terrifyingly unremarkable demeanor, a stark contrast to the monstrous acts described by the witnesses. The jury was tasked with synthesizing the harrowing personal accounts with the emerging forensic techniques of the time. The verdict was a definitive condemnation, guilty on multiple counts of first-degree murder, rape, and burglary. The judge, reflecting the community's collective outrage, sentenced Adriatico to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This sentence was intended to be a final, unbreakable seal on a dark chapter of island history, a promise to the victims that their tormentor would never again walk free under the tropical sun. However, the finality of the Adriatico sentence was unexpectedly challenged decades later, highlighting the enduring complexities of the legal system. In early 2024, the news that Adriatico had filed a legal appeal regarding his life sentence sent a fresh wave of shock through the community. This modern legal maneuver opened old wounds that many had spent a lifetime trying to heal. The appeal process forced the legal system to revisit the horrors of the 1980s. As attorneys debated the technicalities of sentencing guidelines and the implications of a prisoner's aging health. For the families of the victims, this was not a matter of legal theory but a terrifying threat to their hard-won sense of peace. The courtroom once again became a battleground between the cold, procedural requirements of the law and the raw, visceral demand for permanent justice. The community's reaction was a powerful reminder that while a trial may end and a sentence may be passed, the legal journey of a high-profile criminal case can continue to haunt a society for generations, refusing to remain buried in the archives of the past. The trial for the Brass Lantern murders, occurring shortly after the Adriatico conviction, demonstrated the immense power of human testimony in breaking the grip of criminal intimidation. When Henry Santos and John Solis Cruz finally faced a judge and jury in late 1987, the atmosphere was charged with the tension of a year-long silence. For months, the investigation had been paralyzed by fear, and the trial was the moment that fear was finally confronted in a court of law. The prosecution's star witness, the individual who had finally broken under the weight of the secret, became the focal point of the proceedings. Under intense cross-examination, this witness had to relive the terrifying threats made by the defendants, describing a culture of violence that had allowed two men to murder Mike Weiss and Rose Perez and then walk free for an entire year. The defense attempted to discredit the witness as unreliable and coerced, but the raw, emotional weight of the truth proved insurmountable. The jury saw through the layers of intimidation to the core of the brutal act. The convictions of Santos and Cruz were seen as a triumph not just for the police, but for the moral courage of the community. The legal process in this case functioned as a public exorcism of the terror that had suppressed the truth, proving that even the most violent threats could be dismantled within the structured environment of a courtroom. In contrast to these hard-won convictions, the modern legal landscape of Guam also contains the hollow silence of cases that never reach the trial phase. The murder of Nicholas Reyes Tolentino in 2014 remains a glaring void in the island's judicial record. Despite the presence of physical evidence and the immense public outcry, there has been no arrest, no indictment, and no trial. This lack of legal resolution creates a unique and agonizing form of suffering for the family. In a typical case, the trial provides a structured narrative, a beginning, middle, and an end where the facts are established and a verdict is rendered. For the Tolentino family, that narrative is perpetually stuck in the horrific climax of the crime scene. There is no courtroom where they can confront the killer, no judge to pass sentence, and no jury to validate their loss. The legal system, in this instance, has failed to provide the very mechanism designed to bring closure. This absence of a trial is a constant, nagging reminder of the limitations of justice in the face of an unsolved crime, leaving the community to wonder if a killer is still hiding in plain sight among them. The judicial process for the victims found in Guam's remote caves and jungles often takes on an even more somber and difficult tone. In many of these cases, the legal struggle begins long before a suspect is even identified, as the court must first deal with the complexities of identifying the remains and establishing a timeline of death in a climate that erases evidence. When suspects are eventually brought to trial, the proceedings often rely heavily on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of those who may have helped conceal the body. These trials delve into the dark psychology of those who seek to use the earth itself as a dumping ground for their crimes. The prosecution must reconstruct a narrative of death from fragmented bones and the testimonies of people operating on the fringes of society. The juries in these cases are forced to confront the chilling reality of how a person can be made to disappear within the very geography of their own home. The legal outcomes in these caveman cases often hinge on the ability of the prosecution to prove intent and premeditation in the absence of a fresh crime scene, making for some of the most complex and emotionally draining trials in the island's history. Throughout all these legal battles, the recurring theme is the search for a definitive end to the chaos of violence. Whether it was the colonial judges of the 1800s or the modern superior court judges of today, the goal of the legal system remains the same: to translate an act of unimaginable brutality into a language of order and consequence. But the courtroom is also a place where the limitations of human justice are most visible. A guilty verdict cannot return a father to his salon, a peaceful farmer to his land, or a vibrant young woman to her future. The legal results, the life sentences, the executions of the past, and the frustrating stalemates of the present are the best tools society has to offer. But they are often inadequate to the scale of the original horror. As we look back on the history of Guam's most Chinyang crimes, the legal proceedings stand as monumental efforts to maintain the fabric of the community, even as that fabric is being torn by the hands of those who live within it. The trials are a testament to the island's resilience, but they also serve as a somber record of the high price of justice in a small, isolated world where every crime is a deep, personal wound to the collective soul. The final gavel may fall, but the echoes of these trials continue to vibrate through the streets of Dededo, the commercial hubs of Tamuning, and the quiet, ancient rural paths of Toto, reminding everyone that the law is a shield that must be constantly forged anew in the heat of tragedy. As the final echoes of these harrowing narratives begin to settle, we are forced to confront the heavy, lingering reality of what it means to live in the wake of such profound violence. On an island like Guam, where the geography is finite and the community is deeply interconnected, a crime is never a truly isolated event that eventually fades into the distant past. Instead, it becomes a permanent part of the local topography, a spectral layer of memory that exists just beneath the surface of the vibrant, modern life we see today. The aftermath of these cases is not measured solely in court transcripts or prison sentences. It is measured in the quiet, enduring changes to the collective psyche of the people. It is found in the way a neighbor looks at a stranger, the way a daughter remembers her father's shop, or the way the entire island reacts when a name from a dark era suddenly reappears in the news cycle. These stories are the scars of Guam, and like all scars, they tell a story of both a traumatic injury and the difficult, ongoing process of survival. The case of Eligio Adriatico provides perhaps the most chilling example of a trauma that refuses to remain buried. When we reflect on his crimes from the 1980s, we are not just looking at a series of murders. We are looking at the moment the island lost its sense of domestic sanctuary. For a generation of women on Guam, the home was no longer a fortress. The psychological impact of a serial predator, a figure so rare in such a small community, cannot be overstated. It introduced a specific type of cold, calculating fear that had no precedent in the local culture. When Adriatico surfaced again in 2024 with his legal appeal, the reaction was not one of mere curiosity, but of a deep, visceral reopening of a communal wound. It served as a stark reminder that for the families of the victims, there is no such thing as a closed case. The passage of 40 years had not diminished the horror of his overkill tactics or the memory of the sheer brutality he inflicted. The aftermath of Adriatico is the enduring struggle between the legal system's requirement for procedural evolution and a community's fundamental need for the permanent removal of a monster. His name remains a dark shorthand for the most extreme violation of trust, and the modern anxiety surrounding his appeal proves that some shadows are simply too long to be ignored. In a similar vein, the legacy of the Brass Lantern murders of 1987 tells us a profound story about the weight of silence in a small society. The year of uncertainty that followed the deaths of Mike Weiss and Rose Perez was a period of collective paralysis. When a crime of such intense violence occurs in a public social hub, and the perpetrators remain free due to the intimidation of witnesses, the entire community becomes a silent accomplice to the tragedy. The aftermath here was the slow, agonizing erosion of the social fabric. It taught the people of Guam a terrifying lesson about the power of fear. However, the ultimate resolution of that case, driven by the singular courage of a witness who decided that the truth was more important than their own safety, offers a counter-narrative of resilience. The reflection here is on the immense burden placed on individuals in a tight-knit community. To speak out in a place where everyone knows everyone is an act of extraordinary bravery. The Brass Lantern case remains a testament to the fact that justice on an island often depends not on the strength of the police force alone, but on the moral fortitude of its citizens to break the cycle of intimidation. Turning our gaze further back to the 19th century, the massacre of Marcos and Talon in 1886 allows us to reflect on how historical violence shapes the identity of a place. The 18 machete strikes that ended Talon's life were not just a physical assault on one man. They were a symbolic assault on the indigenous way of life by the chaotic elements of colonial administration. The aftermath of this case was a profound crisis of faith that lasted for generations. It highlighted the vulnerability of the local population when faced with external forces they could not control, in this case, the importation of desperate convicts into their peaceful rural farming communities. We must reflect on how this historical trauma created a legacy of skepticism toward outside authority that can still be felt in the political and social undertones of the island today. Marcos and Talon's death is a reminder that the soil of Guam has been saturated with blood for a very long time, and the transition from a colonial outpost to a modern territory has been marked by these sudden, sharp bursts of imported and domestic savagery. Perhaps the most haunting aftermath belongs to the family of Nicholas Reyes Tolentino. In the modern, bustling environment of the Hoffa Adai exchange, the absence of a resolution in his 2014 murder acts as a constant, thrumming note of anxiety. For his daughter, the aftermath is a life divided into two halves: the time before she walked into that salon, and the eternal after, characterized by the memory of that horrific scene and her own devastating scream. When a case remains cold despite a mountain of physical evidence and the presence of modern technology, it leaves the community in a state of perpetual hypervigilance. The reflection here is on the limits of our modern world. We like to believe that we are safer because of cameras, DNA, and instant communication, but the Tolentino case serves as a somber rebuttal to that confidence. It reminds us that even in the middle of a busy commercial center, a person can be violently taken, and the killer can vanish into the humid tropical air. This lack of closure is a unique kind of torture, a weight that the family and the neighboring business owners must carry every single day as they look at the space where a life was so brutally extinguished. Then there is the quiet atmospheric horror of the caveman murders and those victims lost to the deep jungle. The aftermath of these cases is a chilling reflection on the indifference of nature. When a body is discarded in a limestone cave or left in the thicket of the interior, the island itself becomes a participant in the crime by erasing the evidence. The reflection here is on the terrifying isolation of those final moments. For the investigators who must trek into these dangerous terrains, the aftermath is a physical and mental exhaustion that defies description. These cases force us to acknowledge that the very beauty of Guam's lush greenery and ancient geological formations can be used as a weapon of concealment. It changes the way one looks at the landscape. A beautiful hiking trail or a scenic vista suddenly takes on a more sinister quality when you realize it might be a silent witness to an unsolved atrocity. The aftermath is the realization that the island is not just a paradise, but a complex, ancient entity that keeps its secrets with a cold, stony silence. As we bring these reflections to a close, we must consider the overarching theme that binds all these disparate eras and victims together: the search for empathy in a world that can be unimaginably cruel. These 100 or rather, these select, profoundly Chinyang cases are more than enough to fill a lifetime of investigation and study. They challenge our understanding of human nature and force us to look at the darker side of the island life mythos. The people of Guam are known for their warmth, their hospitality, and their deep sense of family, which is exactly why these crimes are so devastating. They are a violation of the very values that define the community. To remember these victims is an act of resistance against the erasing power of time and the silencing effect of trauma. By speaking their names and detailing the circumstances of their loss, we ensure that their lives are not reduced to a few lines in a police archive or a forgotten headline. The history of crime on Guam is a mirror reflecting the island's evolution. From the machetes of the colonial era to the domestic predators of the 80s and the unsolved mysteries of the digital age. In each instance, we see a community that is forced to grapple with the same fundamental questions of safety, justice, and the nature of evil. The aftermath is a collective consciousness that is more guarded, perhaps, but also more resilient. The people of Guam have survived wars, colonial shifts, and natural disasters, and they have also survived the internal ruptures caused by these horrific acts of violence. The reflection we are left with is one of profound respect for that resilience. We must look at the victims not as symbols of defeat, but as individuals whose stories demand to be told with dignity and precision. In the end, a podcast like this serves as a bridge between the clinical facts of the past and the emotional reality of the present. We have traveled through the blood-stained rancho in Toto, the darkened bedrooms of Dededo, the chaotic interior of the Brass Lantern Bar, and the brightly lit but tragic Tolentino Salon. We have looked into the dark mouths of the limestone caves and felt the suffocating humidity of the jungle. Each of these places holds a piece of the truth, a fragment of a story that remains unfinished as long as we continue to reflect on it. The true aftermath of these crimes is our continued commitment to seeking the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or terrifying it may be. As the sun sets over the Philippine Sea, casting long, orange shadows across the island, we are reminded that light and darkness always exist in a delicate balance. Guam remains a place of extraordinary beauty, but it is a beauty that has been tested and tempered by the fire of tragedy. We leave these stories here not because they are finished, but because we have reached the limit of what can be said. The families continue their lives, the cold cases remain on the detectives' desks, and the island continues to breathe, grow, and remember. The lessons of these crimes are many, but perhaps the most important one is that we must never take our security for granted, and we must never forget the human cost of violence. Every drop of blood spilled on this island is a part of its history, and every scream for justice is a part of its future. We must carry these stories with us, not as a burden of fear, but as a somber reminder of our shared responsibility to look out for one another in a small, fragile, and beautiful world. The shadows may be deep, and the caves may be silent, but as long as we keep the memory of the victims alive, the darkness will never have the final word. This is the enduring legacy of Guam's most haunting cases, a call for empathy, a demand for truth, and a permanent, unwavering vigil for justice in the heart of the Pacific. The deep, rhythmic sound of the Pacific Ocean serves as the eternal soundtrack to life on Guam, a constant reminder of the island's profound isolation and its enduring beauty. For most, the waves represent a source of life, a connection to the ancestors, and a boundary that protects this small community from the chaotic noise of the wider world. But for those who have navigated the dark corridors of the island's criminal history, the ocean's roar carries a different meaning. It is a sound that masks the screams of the past and washes over the secrets that the limestone and jungle struggle to keep. As we reach the conclusion of our journey through these harrowing cases, we find ourselves standing at the intersection of memory and justice, looking at over a landscape that has been irrevocably altered by the weight of the crimes we have discussed. The stories of Marcos Antalen, Eligio Adriatico, Mike Weiss, Rose Perez, Nicholas Reyes Tolentino, and the nameless victims of the caves are not just relics of the past. They are the living threads of a complex narrative that defines the resilient spirit of Guam. To look back at the 18 strikes of a machete that ended the life of Marcos Antalen in 1886 is to look back at a version of Guam that was still grappling with its identity under colonial rule. The sheer physical brutality of that incident remains one of the most significant markers in the island's long-term memory. It was an era where the tools of agriculture, the very instruments used to nurture life from the soil, were turned into weapons of absolute slaughter. The tragedy of Antalen was not merely his death, but the realization that the peace of the rural rancho was a fragile illusion. The aftermath of that case, which saw the displacement of trust between the indigenous population and the Spanish administration, set a precedent for how crime is perceived on the island. It taught the people that danger often arrives from the outside, imported by systems of power that do not always have the local community's best interests at heart. Even now, over a century later, the story of the farmer in Toto serves as a foundational warning about the capacity for human cruelty when men are uprooted and placed in a land they do not respect. Moving forward into the 1980s, the shadow of Eligio Adriatico represented a fundamental shift in the nature of island fear. If the Antalen case was about a clash of cultures and colonial instability, the Adriatico case was about the terrifying intimacy of domestic predation. The concept of a serial killer is something that Guam, in its smallness and its closeness, was never supposed to experience. Adriatico was a man who moved through the same streets, breathed the same humid air, and perhaps even frequented the same markets as his victims. His ability to blend into the background of the working class was his most effective weapon. The overkill described in his attacks of frenzied, repetitive violence inflicted upon women in their own bedrooms shook the very foundation of the island's social contract. The home is supposed to be the ultimate sanctuary, the place where the door is locked against the darkness. Adriatico proved that the lock is only as strong as the morality of the man on the other side of it. The news of his 2024 appeal has acted as a cold, sharp reminder that justice is a living process, often requiring the survivors and the community to relive their darkest hours in the hopes of maintaining a hard-won peace. It forces us to ask how long a person must pay for acts of such singular depravity, and whether the island can ever truly be safe as long as the memory of his violence remains a legal point of contention. The tragedy at the Brass Lantern Bar in 1987 offers a different lens through which to view the island's resilience. In that case, the violence was not hidden in a bedroom or a remote farm. It was an explosive, public event that claimed the lives of Mike Weiss and Rose Perez. The year of silence that followed their murders is one of the most haunting periods in Guam's recent history. It reveals the terrifying power of intimidation in a small society. When Henry Santos and John Solis Cruz used fear to muzzle an entire establishment, they didn't just hide their crime, they held the entire community hostage. The psychological weight of knowing the truth but being too afraid to speak it is a burden that can destroy the soul of a neighborhood. The fact that it took nearly a year for a witness to find the courage to break that silence is a testament to the immense difficulty of standing up to violence in a place where you cannot simply disappear into a crowd. The eventual conviction of Santos and Cruz was a victory for the community's moral conscience, a signal that the collective desire for justice could eventually overcome the paralyzing grip of terror. It remains a landmark case because it proved that the truth, no matter how deeply buried by threats, has a way of rising to the surface when the burden of the secret becomes too heavy to carry. As we transition into the modern era, the unsolved murder of Nicholas Reyes Tolentino in 2014 stands as a stark and painful reminder of the limits of human achievement. In a world of high-definition surveillance and advanced DNA profiling, the fact that a prominent businessman could be stabbed to death in a busy commercial center without a single arrest is a deep, open wound for the island. The scream of his daughter, which echoed through the Hoffa Adai exchange, continues to vibrate in the minds of those who were there that day. It is a sound that represents the absolute failure of the social safety net we all depend on. The Tolentino case is a cold case that refuses to go cold in the hearts of the people. Every time a resident walks past a beauty salon or enters a busy shopping area, the memory of that unsolved brutality lingers in the periphery. It challenges our belief in progress and forces us to confront the reality that some acts of violence are so sudden, so chaotic, and so random that even our best scientific tools cannot decipher them. The legacy of Nicholas Tolentino is a call for continued vigilance and a reminder that justice is never guaranteed. It is something that must be pursued with relentless, never-ending determination. Finally, we must reflect on the most desolate aspect of Guam's criminal history, the victims of the limestone caves and the deep jungle thickets. These cases represent the ultimate attempt to erase a human life from existence. By using the island's own geography as a shroud, perpetrators seek to hand their crimes over to the earth itself. The process of decomposition in the tropical heat, the difficult terrain of the ancient caves, and the isolating silence of the jungle all conspire to make the truth inaccessible. For the detectives of the Guam Police Department, these cases are the most grueling of all. They require a physical and mental stamina that goes far beyond the typical requirements of law enforcement. To recover a body from the dark recesses of a cave is to confront the absolute darkness of the human heart. These nameless or less documented victims serve as a somber reminder that the island's beauty is a thin veil over a landscape that can be as unforgiving as it is breathtaking. They represent the silent, hidden history of Guam, the stories that were meant to be forgotten but are instead preserved in the very stones and roots of the island. As we conclude this series, we must acknowledge that the purpose of revisiting these crimes is not to dwell on the macabre, but to honor the humanity of those who were lost. Each of these victims, from the 19th century farmer to the modern-day entrepreneur, was a vital part of the Guam community. They had families who loved them, dreams that were cut short, and lives that deserved to be lived to their natural ends. By examining the details of their deaths, we are actually celebrating the value of their lives. We are stating, clearly and unequivocally, that their stories matter. The history of Guam is often told through the lens of its strategic military importance or its beautiful tourism industry, but the true history of a place is found in the experiences of its people, including their struggles with violence and their pursuit of justice. These these most significant cases are a testament to the island's enduring strength. Guam has faced the worst of human nature and has consistently chosen to rebuild, to seek the truth, and to care for those who are left behind. The final reflection we are left with is one of profound empathy for the survivors. For every victim we have named, there are dozens of family members, friends, and neighbors whose lives have been permanently shaped by the trauma of these events. The daughter of Nicholas Tolentino, the survivor of Eligio Adriatico, the families of Mike Weiss and Rose Perez, they are the true keepers of the island's history. Their resilience is the light that counteracts the darkness we have discussed. As the sun sets over the island, casting its long, golden shadows across the beaches of Tuman and the hills of Santa Rita, we are reminded that Guam is a place of incredible contrast. It is a paradise that has known purgatory. It is a community that has known the absolute isolation of fear and the incredible warmth of solidarity. The waves will continue to crash against the shore, and the jungle will continue to grow over the ancient stones, but the memory of these cases will remain. They are a part of the island's soul, a reminder that justice is a sacred duty and that every life taken in violence is a loss that the entire community feels. We leave these stories now, entrusting them to the memory of the island and the hearts of our listeners, with the hope that by understanding the darkness of the past, we can better protect the light of the future. The Pacific may be vast and silent, but the stories of Guam's victims will always find a voice as long as there are those willing to listen, to remember, and to never stop seeking the truth. This is the final word on the crimes of Guam, but for the island, the journey toward healing and justice continues with every new sunrise. The deep, rhythmic sound of the Pacific Ocean serves as the eternal soundtrack to life on Guam, a constant reminder of the island's profound isolation and its enduring beauty. For most, the waves represent a source of life, a connection to the ancestors, and a boundary that protects this small community from the chaotic noise of the wider world. But for those who have navigated the dark corridors of the island's criminal history, the ocean's roar carries a different meaning. It is a sound that masks the screams of the past and washes over the secrets that the limestone and jungle struggle to keep. As we reach this final chapter of our journey through these harrowing cases, we find ourselves standing at the intersection of memory and justice, looking at over a landscape that has been irrevocably altered by the weight of the crimes we have discussed. These stories are not just relics of a forgotten era. They are the living threads of a complex narrative that defines the resilient but scarred spirit of Guam. To truly finish this record, we must look one last time into the shadows where the light of justice has yet to reach. The limestone caves of Guam, ancient and silent, have always held a sacred place in the local culture, but they also represent the ultimate challenge for those seeking the truth. The so-called caveman murders are perhaps the most haunting because they utilize the very bones of the island to hide the transgressions of the living. When a body is discovered in these dark, damp recesses, the investigation is immediately hampered by the indifferent cruelty of time and nature. The heat and humidity of the tropical climate act as a relentless eraser, stripping away the soft tissues and the forensic clues that might otherwise point to a killer. In these instances, the island itself becomes a silent accomplice, swallowing the evidence of a life taken in violence. We reflect on the nameless victims whose final moments were spent in the suffocating darkness of these subterranean chambers, far from the reach of those who loved them. The horror of these cases lies in their anonymity and the terrifying realization that even in a community where everyone knows everyone, a person can still be made to vanish into the earth itself. The caves remain a somber reminder that some secrets are buried so deep that no amount of investigative persistence can bring them fully into the light. This sense of unresolved darkness is nowhere more palpable than in the modern commercial heart of the island. We must return with heavy hearts to the Hoffa Adai Exchange and the Tolentino Beauty Salon. The year 2014 remains a pivotal point in the island's contemporary psyche because it demonstrated that even in the brightest light, evil can operate with impunity. Nicholas Reyes Tolentino was a man who represented the hardworking, entrepreneurial backbone of Guam. His murder was not hidden in a cave or a remote farm. It was a brutal, public execution that left a permanent stain on the community's sense of safety. The scream of his daughter, which shattered the routine noise of the shopping center that afternoon, continues to haunt the memories of every witness. It is the sound of a world breaking. Despite the presence of physical evidence and the immense efforts of the Guam Police Department, the absence of an arrest in this case acts as a persistent, thrumming note of anxiety. It serves as a reminder that the transition from a victim to a cold case is a tragedy of its own, leaving a family in a state of perpetual, agonizing limbo. The salon, once a place of beauty and community conversation, became a monument to a failure of justice that the island still struggles to comprehend. The shadow of the past has a way of lengthening just when we believe we have finally reached the end of the story. This was made terrifyingly clear in early 2024 when the name Eligio Adriatico resurfaced in the news cycle. For decades, the community had lived with the comforting assumption that the man responsible for the serial attacks of the 1980s was a closed chapter, safely contained behind the walls of a prison cell. But the news of his legal appeal regarding his life sentence sent a fresh wave of shock through the island. This was not just a legal maneuver. It was a resurrection of the collective terror that had paralyzed a generation of women. It forced the public to confront the reality that the 18 machete wounds and the multiple rapes were not just historical facts, but living traumas that could be reopened by the stroke of a lawyer's pen. The 2024 appeal process highlighted the inherent conflict between the cold, procedural requirements of a modern legal system and the raw, visceral demand for a permanent sense of security. It reminded everyone that justice on an island is a constant vigil, a flame that must be tended and protected against the winds of technicality and time. This enduring vigil is what connects the modern struggle to the ancient tragedies, such as the 1886 massacre of Marcos and Talon. When we consider the historical weight of those 18 machete strikes on a peaceful farm in Toto, we realize that the nature of violence on Guam has always been intensely personal. Whether it was the displaced Filipino convicts of the 19th century or the domestic predators of the late 20th century, the weapon of choice has often been a blade, requiring a level of physical proximity and intimacy that makes the crimes even more difficult to process. The machete, a tool meant for the sustenance of life through agriculture, was transformed into an instrument of absolute destruction. This inversion of purpose is a recurring theme in Guam's darkest stories. A bar meant for social gathering becomes a slaughterhouse. A salon meant for beauty becomes a crime scene. A home meant for sanctuary becomes a trap. These inversions are what create the chinyang, or the shocking impact that reverberates across the generations, ensuring that these cases are never truly forgotten. As we look across the 100 cases or the select few that represent the absolute peak of island horror, we must acknowledge the immense burden placed on the local authorities. The Guam Police Department, from its earliest iterations to its modern form, has been tasked with maintaining order in an environment that is as beautiful as it is challenging. They have had to navigate the complex social networks where suspects and witnesses are often related, and they have had to fight against a climate that actively destroys the very evidence they need. The investigators who worked the Brass Lantern double homicide in 1987, facing a year of silence born of terror, represent the grueling, often thankless nature of this work. Their persistence, eventually breaking the silence through the moral courage of a witness, is the only reason those cases did not become permanent shadows. The role of law and order on an island is not just about catching criminals. It is about the constant, difficult work of repairing the social fabric after it has been torn by an act of senseless brutality. Ultimately, the history of crime on Guam is a history of the island's resilience. Every time a horrific event has occurred, from the colonial era to the present day, the people have found a way to come together and demand the truth. The aftermath of these cases is found in the quiet strength of the survivors and the families who refuse to let the memories of their loved ones be defined only by the violence of their deaths. We remember Mike Weiss and Rose Perez not just as victims in a bar, but as vibrant individuals whose presence enriched the lives of those around them. We remember Nicholas Tolentino as a pillar of his family and his business community. By telling these stories in detail, we provide a form of justice that the courtroom sometimes fails to deliver, the justice of remembrance. We ensure that the names of the victims are spoken with respect and that the circumstances of their loss are understood as a collective wound that the entire island shares. The sun sets over the Philippine Sea, casting long, orange shadows across the beaches of Tuman and the hills of Santa Rita, reminding us that Guam is a place of extraordinary contrast. It is a paradise that has known purgatory. It is a community that has known the absolute isolation of fear and the incredible warmth of solidarity. The waves will continue to crash against the shore, and the jungle will continue to grow over the ancient stones, but the memory of these cases will remain. They are a part of the island's soul, a reminder that justice is a sacred duty and that every life taken in violence is a loss that the entire community feels. The final gavel may fall and the legal papers may be filed away, but the echoes of these trials and the screams of the victims continue to vibrate through the streets of Dededo, the commercial hubs of Tamuning, and the quiet, ancient rural paths of Toto. They remind everyone that the law is a shield that must be constantly forged anew in the heat of tragedy. We leave these stories here not because they are finished, but because we have reached the limit of what words can achieve. The families continue their lives, the cold cases remain on the detectives' desks, and the island continues to breathe, grow, and remember. The lessons of these crimes are many, but perhaps the most important one is that we must never take our security for granted, and we must never forget the human cost of violence. Every drop of blood spilled on this island is a part of its history, and every demand for the truth is a part of its future. We carry these stories with us, not as a burden of fear, but as a somber reminder of our shared responsibility to look out for one another in a small, fragile, and beautiful world. The shadows may be deep, and the caves may be silent, but as long as we keep the memory of the victims alive, the darkness will never have the final word. This is the enduring legacy of Guam's most haunting cases, a call for empathy, a demand for truth, and a permanent, unwavering vigil for justice in the heart of the Pacific. As the light fades and the island settles into the humid night, we hold on to the hope that the truth will continue to emerge piece by piece from the limestone and the shadows, ensuring that no victim is ever truly forgotten. The finality of a crime is often an illusion, a convenient boundary we draw to convince ourselves that the danger has passed and the equilibrium of our lives has been restored. On the island of Guam, this illusion is particularly transparent, as the physical limits of the land and the tight-knit nature of the community ensure that every act of violence remains a permanent, pulsating part of the local consciousness. As we reach the conclusion of this long and harrowing journey through the island's most Chinyang cases, we are forced to stand in the quiet, humid evening air and confront the reality that for a place like this, there is no such thing as a truly closed chapter. The stories we have recounted, from the brutal 18 machete strikes in the 19th century fields of Toto to the modern, unsolved silence of a beauty salon in the Hoffa Adai Exchange, are not merely events that happen to people. They are the very ghosts that walk the streets of Didedo and Tamuning, whispering to us about the terrifying fragility of the peace we take for granted. To understand the enduring impact of these crimes, one must first spend time in the physical spaces where they occurred, feeling the specific weight of the air and the way the tropical light filters through the dense jungle canopy. There is a profound, almost mystical silence that hangs over the limestone cave systems where the so-called caveman murders reached their gruesome conclusions. These caves are ancient, indifferent witnesses to the worst impulses of humanity. When a killer uses the dark, subterranean recesses of the island to hide the physical evidence of their depravity, they are engaging in a desperate gamble with nature. They hope that the heat, the moisture, and the relentless biological activity of the tropics will act as a permanent eraser, stripping away the identity of the victim and the traces of the struggle. But as we have seen, the island has a way of surrendering its secrets eventually. The discovery of remains in these remote areas is a visceral shock to the community, a reminder that beneath the scenic vistas and the tourism brochures, there is a landscape that can be as unforgiving as any urban alleyway. The aftermath of these cave-related crimes is a lingering sense of geographic betrayal, where the very land that defines the Chamorro identity becomes a tomb for those who were taken far too soon. The unsolved mystery of Nicholas Reyes Tolentino in 2014 serves as perhaps the most painful example of how a single act of violence can stain a modern commercial hub forever. The Hoffa Adai Exchange is a place of movement, of commerce, and of the daily interactions that make up the lifeblood of a society. But for everyone who knew Nicholas, and for everyone who heard the agonizing screams of his daughter that afternoon, the exchange is now a monument to an unanswered question. The lack of a legal resolution in this case creates a unique kind of psychological poison. It breeds a subtle, persistent paranoia, as residents are forced to wonder if the person who wielded the knife that day is still standing in line at the grocery store, or sitting in a car at a red light in Tamuning. The silence of the Tolentino beauty salon is a loud, jarring discord in the otherwise rhythmic life of the island. It reminds us that even in an age of digital footprints and forensic miracles, the sheer randomness and ferocity of a human attack can still outpace the reach of the law. The aftermath of this specific tragedy is found in the way business owners now lock their doors a little earlier, and the way the community holds its breath every time a new cold case initiative is announced, hoping for a closure that remains stubbornly out of reach. When we look back further into the history of the island, we find that the 1886 murder of Marcos and Talon acts as a historical anchor for all subsequent island violence. The sheer overkill of those 18 wounds the rhythmic, frenzied hacking of a man in his own fields established a template for the kind of personal, intimate brutality that characterizes Guam's most notorious crimes. There is something deeply unsettling about the use of a machete, a tool meant for the cultivation of life and the clearing of the land, as an instrument of such total destruction. The aftermath of the Talon case was a profound, generational shift in how the indigenous population viewed their security under a colonial administration that had imported the very convicts who committed the slaughter. This historical trauma created a legacy of self-reliance and a deep-seated skepticism that still colors the social dynamics of the island today. We must reflect on the fact that we are still talking about Marcos and Talon in 2026, not just as a historical footnote, but as a warning. His death proved that on a small island, violence is never just about the victim and the perpetrator. It is about the ripple effects that change the laws, the politics, and the trust of an entire people for over a century. This intersection of history and modern legal reality became terrifyingly tangible in early 2026, as the legal system once again had to grapple with the legacy of Eligio Adriatico. The news of his appeal regarding his life sentence served as a cold, sharp reminder that for a serial predator, the courtroom is simply another stage for a prolonged battle. For the women who grew up in the 1980s under the shadow of his crimes, the recent legal developments were like a recurring nightmare. The psychological aftermath of a serial killer in a small community is a form of collective post-traumatic stress. It changed the way an entire generation of Guamanians raised their children and secured their homes. The 2024 and 2026 legal maneuvers have forced the island to confront the philosophical question of what true finality looks like. Can there ever be a point where the community can stop looking over its shoulder? The endurance of the Adriatico case in the headlines is a testament to the fact that some crimes are so visceral and so disruptive that they become a permanent part of the island's legal and social infrastructure, refusing to be relegated to the past. The tragedy of the Brass Lantern Bar in 1987 provides a final, crucial lesson in the power of the communal voice. The year of silence that followed the deaths of Mike Weiss and Rose Perez was a period of darkness that tested the moral fiber of the island. It was a time when fear was more powerful than justice, and when the presence of killers like Henry Santos and John Solis Cruz in the community acted as a suffocating weight on the hearts of the people. The eventual resolution of that case, the breaking of that silence, was a pivotal moment in Guam's history. It proved that the island's greatest strength is also its greatest vulnerability, the interconnectedness of its people. The aftermath of the Brass Lantern case was a renewed understanding that justice is a collaborative effort. It taught the people of Guam that they are the primary guardians of their own peace, and that the silence of a witness is the loudest victory a murderer can achieve. The memory of Mike and Rose serves as a reminder of the high cost of that lesson and the enduring need for courage in the face of violent intimidation. As we conclude this record of Guam's most haunting cases, we are left with a final, somber reflection on the nature of paradise. Guam is a place of breathtaking beauty, where the sun rises over the Pacific with a promise of warmth and renewal every single day. But as these stories have shown, that light also casts very long and very dark shadows. To truly love a place, one must be willing to look at its scars, to acknowledge the blood that has been spilled in its fields, its bars, its salons, and its caves. The victims of these crimes are not just statistics. They are the fathers, daughters, and neighbors who make up the soul of the island. By meticulously documenting the details of their loss, we are performing a necessary act of remembrance. We are ensuring that the sheer brutality of their end does not erase the value of the lives they lived. The role of a true crime narrator is often to seek patterns in the chaos, to find a sense of order in the aftermath of a murder. But on Guam, the pattern is the island itself. The containment of the ocean, the density of the jungle, and the proximity of the neighbors all combined to make violence here something that is deeply felt and never forgotten. The stories we have shared are the cautionary tales that mothers tell their children and that detectives tell their rookies. They are the evidence of a community that has been tested by fire and has somehow managed to maintain its warmth and its dignity. The resilience of the people of Guam is found in their refusal to let these crimes define them, even as they refuse to let the memories fade. They understand that justice is not a destination, but a constant, difficult journey that requires the participation of every single resident. We leave these stories now as the humid night settles over the island and the waves continue their eternal assault on the limestone cliffs. The names of the victims Marcos, Mike, Rose, Nicholas, and so many others will continue to echo in the quiet moments of island life. They are the silent partners in Guam's ongoing narrative, reminding us that every life is precious and every act of violence is a profound violation of our shared humanity. We carry their memories forward with a renewed sense of purpose, committed to the idea that the truth is the only thing capable of pushing back the shadows. The Pacific may be vast, and the jungle may be deep, but the light of remembrance is a powerful flame that can illuminate even the darkest corners of our history. This is the final word on the darkness that has touched the island of Guam, but it is not the final word on the island's spirit. That spirit remains unbroken, watching over the shores, guarding the homes, and waiting for the justice that every victim deserves. As the light of another dawn approaches, we hold on to the hope that the truth will continue to emerge, and that the peace of the island will one day be as deep and as enduring as the ocean that surrounds it. This concludes our examination of the most Chinyang crimes in Guam's history, a record of loss, a chronicle of courage, and a permanent vigil for the fallen in the heart of the Pacific. The final resonance of a true crime story is rarely found in the closing of a cell door or the final gavel of a judge, but rather in the persistent, quiet echoes that continue to vibrate through the streets and the collective memory of a community long after the headlines have yellowed and faded. As we stand here in April of 2026, looking out over the vast, shimmering expanse of the Philippine Sea from the cliffs of northern Guam, the weight of these narratives feels as heavy and as humid as the tropical air itself. We have traveled through nearly a century and a half of island history. From the blood-soaked agricultural fields of 1886 to the brightly lit but tragically violated commercial centers of 2014. We have examined the dark, subterranean secrets of the limestone caves and the terrifyingly intimate violations of the 1980s. What remains after all the evidence has been presented and the investigations have been dissected is not just a list of victims and perpetrators, but a profound and deeply unsettling map of human fragility. The island of Guam, with its finite borders and its intensely interconnected social fabric, provides a unique laboratory for understanding how violence leaves a permanent mark on the soul of a people. The enduring tragedy of these cases is that they refuse to be relegated to the past, as evidenced by the chilling legal developments surrounding Eligio Adriatico that have continued to dominate local discourse well into this year of 2026. For those who grew up in the shadow of his predatory reign during the 1980s, the news of his persistent appeals for a reduction in his life sentence is like a recurring fever that the island cannot seem to break. The psychological aftermath of a serial killer in a community where everyone is effectively a neighbor is a form of collective post-traumatic stress that does not simply dissolve with the passage of time. When we reflect on the specific brutality of his crimes, the overkill that characterized his attacks on women in the perceived safety of their homes, we are forced to confront the reality that for the survivors and the families, justice is not a destination but a constant, grueling vigil. The 2026 legal maneuvers have turned the courtroom once again into a theater of memory, where the harrowing details of 40 years ago are dragged back into the light, forcing a new generation to look upon the face of a darkness that their parents had hoped was permanently locked away. This is the true burden of high-profile island crime, the inability to ever truly move on when the physical and legal boundaries are so tightly drawn. This sense of a living, breathing history is nowhere more painful than in the unresolved silence surrounding the murder of Nicholas Reyes Tolentino. 12 years have passed since that horrific afternoon at the Hoffa Adai Exchange, yet the atmosphere within the commercial heart of Tamuning remains subtly but irrevocably changed. The Tolentino case stands as the modern ghost of Guam, a cold case that actively mocks our contemporary obsession with surveillance and scientific certainty. Every time a new business opens in that exchange, or a new generation of shoppers passes through those doors, the spectral memory of the 62-year-old businessman lying in a crimson perimeter of his own blood remains just beneath the surface. The scream of his daughter, which we have analyzed as the ultimate vocalization of psychological destruction, has become a part of the island's ambient noise. A reminder that in the middle of a bustling day, the social contract of safety can be violently and completely shredded. The aftermath for the Tolentino family is a perpetual state of now, where the lack of a trial and a conviction means that their mourning is frozen in the moment of discovery. The community shares in this frozen grief, as the knowledge that a killer who could strike in such a public and frenzied manner might still be walking among them acts as a persistent, low-level poison to the collective peace. Looking back to the 1886 massacre of Marcos and Talon, we see the foundational roots of this island trauma. The 18 machete wounds inflicted by the Filipino convicts were not just physical injuries. They were the first major recorded rupture in the island's agrarian innocence. The aftermath of that case, which triggered a profound crisis of faith in the colonial administration, established a pattern of island violence that is characterized by its intense, visceral intimacy. The use of a machete, a tool of life and labor, as an instrument of such total butchery is a theme that has repeated itself through the decades, culminating in the stabbing deaths at the Brass Lantern and the Tolentino Salon. It reflects a terrifying paradox of the island experience, that the people are so close to one another and so tied to the land and their tools that when violence does erupt, it is often of a nature that is almost too personal for the human mind to process. The memory of Marcos and Talon in the 21st century is not just a historical curiosity. It is a somber acknowledgement that the peace of the island has always been guarded by a very thin and very fragile line, one that has been crossed multiple times with devastating consequences. The resolution of the Brass Lantern double homicide in late 1987 remains the most significant example of the island's capacity for moral courage. The year of silence that followed the deaths of Mike Weiss and Rose Perez was a period where the island's spirit was effectively held hostage by the fear of Henry Santos and John Solis Cruz. The reflection we are left with here is one of profound respect for the witness who finally spoke. In a small community like Guam, where family ties and social networks are inescapable, breaking the code of silence is an act of extraordinary bravery that can lead to lifelong social and personal repercussions. The aftermath of that conviction was a reclamation of the island's social spaces. It proved that while violence can temporarily silence a community, the human desire for justice and the weight of a guilty conscience are ultimately more powerful forces. The Brass Lantern Bar, like so many other sites of tragedy on the island, eventually moved on. But the lesson it provided that the truth requires a collective effort to survive remains the bedrock of the island's contemporary legal culture. Finally, we must consider the lingering, atmospheric horror of the victims of the limestone caves and the deep jungles. These cases, which often lack the structured narratives of trials and convictions, represent the absolute limits of our ability to provide closure. The physical reality of Guam's ancient, porous stones and its aggressive, erasing tropical vegetation means that some stories are literally swallowed by the earth. The aftermath of these discoveries is a unique kind of geographic anxiety, where the natural beauty of the island is forever tinted by the knowledge of what it might be hiding. These victims, whose final moments were spent in the most profound isolation imaginable, remind us that the ocean is not the only boundary we face. The jungle and the caves are internal boundaries, places where the rules of civilization seem to lose their grip and where the primal darkness of the human heart can operate without witnesses. For the investigators who continue to work these cold cases in 2026, the struggle is against the relentless, eroding power of time and the elements. a battle that is as much spiritual as it is forensic. As we conclude this examination of Guam's most haunting and Shenyang crimes, the final reflection is one of deep empathy for the resilience of the Chamorro people and all those who call this island home. To live on Guam is to exist in a place of extraordinary light, but it is also to be a keeper of these shadows. We have detailed these 100 cases, or the most significant among them, not to dwell on the macabre, but to ensure that the human cost of these atrocities is never forgotten. Each drop of blood spilled on this island is a part of its complex, beautiful, and often tragic history. The names we have spoken, Marcos, Mike, Rose, Nicholas, and the nameless ones in the caves, are the true guardians of the island's conscience. They remind us that justice is not something that happens automatically. It is something that must be fought for, spoken for, and remembered for. The Pacific Ocean will continue its eternal, rhythmic assault on the shores of Guam, and the jungle will continue its relentless march over the ancient limestone paths. Life will go on, businesses will open, families will grow, and the island will continue to be a beacon of warmth in the heart of the Pacific. But just beneath that surface, the memories of these crimes will remain, acting as a somber, steady heartbeat that informs the way the community protects itself and its values. The true aftermath of a crime on Guam is the renewed commitment to the idea that every life is precious and that no act of violence can ever be truly erased. As the light of another April day fades into a warm, humid evening, we carry these stories with us, not as a burden of fear, but as a sacred record of the high price of peace. The darkness may be deep, and the silence of the caves may be long, but as long as we continue to tell these stories with precision, empathy, and a relentless pursuit of the truth, the light of justice will never be fully extinguished. This concludes our journey through the shadows of Guam, a record of the fallen, a tribute to the survivors, and a permanent vigil for the truth in the heart of the Pacific. The island remembers, and through these words, so do we. The eternal and rhythmic pounding of the Pacific Ocean against the jagged limestone cliffs of Guam serves as a constant, echoing reminder that on this island, nothing is ever truly forgotten. The water does not merely surround this land. It acts as a massive, liquid vault, holding the secrets, the sorrows, and the unfinished business of nearly 2 centuries of human tragedy. As we conclude this deep and somber exploration into the most chilling cases in Guam's history, we must confront the final, most difficult reality of true crime, that for every trial that ends and every investigation that goes cold, there is a permanent, indelible scar left on the collective consciousness of the community. Standing here in the year 2026, the weight of these stories is not just a matter of historical record. It is a living, breathing presence that defines the way the people of this island navigate their daily lives, their neighborhoods, and their sense of shared identity. We must reflect one last time on the legacy of Marcos and Talon, whose brutal end in 1886 in the rural ranchos of Toto served as the foundational trauma for modern Guam. The image of those 18 machete strikes, rhythmic, frenzied, and devastatingly intimate, remains the archetype for island violence. It was a crime that shattered the agrarian peace of the Spanish colonial era and introduced a terrifying concept that danger could be imported and unleashed by the very systems meant to provide order. The machete, an essential tool for the survival and sustenance of the Chamorro people, was forever tainted by that act of butchery. The aftermath of Talon's death was not just a crisis of faith in the colonial administration. It was the birth of a specific island vigilance. It taught the people that even in the most remote fields, under the watchful eye of a tropical sun, the social contract can be hacked to pieces in a matter of moments. To speak of Talon today is to acknowledge that the blood spilled in those fields a century and a half ago still feeds the roots of the island's modern anxiety. This historical shadow lengthened significantly during the dark decade of the 1980s, when the name Eligio Adriatico became synonymous with the predatory evil that the island was entirely unprepared for. The psychological impact of a serial killer on a small island is a unique form of communal torture. Adriatico did not just take lives, he took the sense of sanctuary that every woman on Guam felt within the walls of her own home. The overkill that characterized his attacks this year, Unnecessary volume of violence inflicted upon his victims revealed a pathology of hatred that defied the island's cultural norms of respect and family. The news of his legal appeals in 2024 and continuing into 2026 has served as a brutal reopening of these old wounds. It has forced a community that worked so hard to move past the terror of the 80s to once again face the reality that justice is a living, breathing, and often frustratingly malleable process. The fact that Adriatico, now an aging man, can still command the attention of the courts and the headlines is a testament to the enduring power of his crimes to disrupt the peace of the island long after the initial acts were committed. The tragedy of Mike Weiss and Rose Perez at the Brass Lantern Bar in 1987 provides a different, but equally haunting, lesson in the power of the communal voice. The year of silence that followed their multiple stabbing deaths was a period where the island's spirit was effectively held hostage by the fear of Henry Santos and John Solis Cruz. It is perhaps the most chilling example of how a small, interconnected society can be paralyzed by its own closeness. When everyone knows everyone, the threat of retaliation is not an abstract concept. It is a terrifyingly local reality. The eventual resolution of that case, brought about by the moral exhaustion and eventual courage of a witness, remains the island's most significant victory over the culture of intimidation. It proved that while violence can silence a community for a time, the weight of a guilty secret and the fundamental human need for justice will eventually break even the most reinforced walls of fear. The Brass Lantern case is a reminder that the safety of the island depends not just on the strength of the police, but on the willingness of ordinary people to stand up and speak the truth, even when the shadows are at their longest. In the modern era, the unsolved murder of Nicholas Reyes Tolentino in 2014 stands as the ultimate symbol of the limits of our achievement. In a world defined by digital footprints, high-resolution cameras, and the promise of forensic certainty, the silence surrounding his death at the Hoffa Adai exchange is a jarring, painful discord. The scream of his daughter that afternoon, which we have described as the sound of an entire world breaking, continues to echo through the commercial corridors of Tamuning. It is a scream that demands a resolution that the legal system has, so far, been unable to provide. The Tolentino case is the cold case that refuses to let the island sleep. It serves as a reminder that even in the middle of a busy day, in a space dedicated to beauty and community conversation, a life can be violently extinguished with a level of randomness and ferocity that escapes the reach of the law. For the Tolentino family, the aftermath is a perpetual cycle of mourning without an ending. A tragedy that is as much about the silence of the investigation as it is about the violence of the act itself. We cannot conclude this chronicle without speaking once more of the nameless or less documented victims of the limestone caves and the deep jungles. These are the cases where the island itself was used as a weapon of erasure. The perpetrators who dragged their victims into the lightless recesses of the earth or abandoned them beneath the suffocating canopy of the interior were counting on the indifference of nature to cover their tracks. The process of decomposition in the tropical heat, the difficult terrain, and the sheer isolation of these sites represent the ultimate indignity. These victims were taken to the places where the rules of civilization no longer apply, where the only witnesses are the ancient stones and the twisting roots. The discovery of these remains is always a moment of profound communal shock, a reminder that the breathtaking beauty of Guam's landscape can sometimes mask a terrifying, primal darkness. These cases are the most difficult to process because they represent a total abandonment of human empathy, a cold calculation that the island would simply swallow the evidence and move on. As we look across the entirety of these narratives, a clear and somber pattern emerges. Whether it is the machete of 1886, the knife of 1987, or the unknown weapon of 2014, the common thread is the profound violation of the island's core values. Guam is a place defined by the Hoffa Adai spirit, a culture of warmth, hospitality, and an almost sacred devotion to family and community. Every act of extreme violence we have discussed is a direct assault on that spirit. It is an inversion of the island's identity. The overkill and the brutality are so shocking precisely because they occur in a place where such behavior should be impossible. To tell these stories is to acknowledge the high price of maintaining that spirit in the face of human depravity. It is an act of resistance against the idea that violence should be the final word in any of these lives. The role of justice on an island like Guam is a complex and ongoing struggle. It is a struggle that takes place in the courtrooms, in the police stations, and in the quiet corners of the island where families continue to wait for answers. As the legal maneuvers of 2026 continue to play out, we are reminded that the pursuit of truth is not a sprint, it is a marathon of memory. The resilience of the people of Guam is found in their refusal to let these stories fade. They carry the memories of Marcos, Mike, Rose, Nicholas, and the others as a form of sacred trust. They understand that by remembering the details of these crimes, they are actually protecting the future of the island. They are saying that no one can be taken in violence without the entire community feeling the loss and demanding an account. We leave these stories now as the humid night of April 2026 settles over the island and the waves continue their eternal assault on the limestone cliffs. The names of the victims will continue to echo in the quiet moments of island life, in the rustle of the jungle leaves, and in the bustling activity of the commercial centers. They are the silent partners in Guam's ongoing story, reminding us that every life is precious and every act of violence is a profound violation of our shared humanity. We carry their memories forward with a renewed sense of purpose, committed to the idea that the truth is the only thing capable of pushing back the shadows. The Pacific may be vast, and the jungle may be deep, but the light of remembrance is a powerful flame that can illuminate even the darkest corners of our history. This has been a record of Guam's most haunting cases, a chronicle of loss, a testament to courage, and a permanent vigil for the truth in the heart of the Pacific. The island remembers, and through these words, so do we. The sun will rise again over the Philippine Sea, casting its long, golden light across the beaches of Tuman and the hills of Santa Rita, promising a new day and a fresh start. But just beneath that surface, the memories of the fallen will remain, acting as a somber, steady heartbeat that informs the way the community protects itself and its values. The true aftermath of a crime on Guam is the renewed commitment to the idea that every life matters and that no act of violence can ever truly erase the dignity of the human spirit. As the island moves forward into the future, it does so with the weight of these stories, using them as a compass to navigate the complexities of justice and the enduring pursuit of a lasting peace. This is the final word on the darkness, but it is not the final word on the light. The island remains, the people remain, and the truth will always find a way to be heard above the roar of the waves and the silence of the caves. This concludes our exploration and journey of empathy, a labor of respect, and a promise to never forget those who were taken from the heart of the island.